Chapter 318. You still collect firewood for them? Zhang Xiaohua was a little speechless. When he was young, he also went up the mountain to collect firewood. However, his eldest brother and second brother took turns to follow him, and only gave him a small bundle of firewood to carry. That feeling was still fresh in his memory. That's right. Otherwise, their tea stall would have to spend another 2 copper coins to buy firewood, Xiaohua said with a smile. Seeing that there weren't many people around, Zhang Xiaohua's childlike innocence was aroused. He put the long sword on the road and said with a smile, Then you carry it. If you can carry it, I'll give you an extra copper coin every day. However, if you can't carry it, I'll deduct a copper coin every day. Ah. Really? Young master can't trick me, Zhang Xiaohua said. How can I trick you? Carry it for me. Xiaohua went forward ecstatically. His small hand grabbed the middle of the long sword and tried to lift it up. However, the long sword didn't move at all on the ground. Xiaohua was shocked. He took the small bundle from his shoulder and walked to the side of the long sword. His 2 hands grabbed the 2 sides of the long sword and tried to lift it up. Unfortunately, even if he used all his strength and his small face turned red, the long sword still didn't move. At this time, Xiaohua realized how naive he was. His tears were about to fall. He was extremely regretful. Great, now he lost a copper coin a day. Then, he let go of his hand and picked up his small bundle. He lowered his head and said dejectedly, Young master, this little one can't carry it. You can carry it yourself. Zhang Xiaohua looked at his appearance and laughed in his heart. He bent down and picked up the long sword and said, Let's go. Bring me into the city. Xiaohua said weakly. Yes, young master. Please follow me. Zhang Xiaohua saw this and said with a smile, Xiaohua ji, don't mind it. I was just joking with you. Now I officially announce that I'll give you 11 copper coins every day. Ah? It's true. Ji Xiaohua beamed with joy and said, Young master is such a good person. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she frowned slightly and said, Can you not call me young master? That's why it sounds so weird. Xiaohua asked curiously, Young master, if I don't call you young master, what should I call you? Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head and felt depressed. That's right. What should Ji Xiaohua call her? Forget it. Call me if you want. Zhang Xiaohua waved his hand helplessly. All right, young master, please come with me. With that, Ji Xiaohua happily led Zhang Xiaohua along the main road towards Songning town. However, just as they entered the town, Zhang Xiaohua keenly noticed the sweat on Ji Xiaohua's forehead. Zhang Xiaohua found it very strange. They had just walked for a while. Logically speaking, this child often walked, so how could he be so tired? While she was puzzled, Xiaohua Ji stopped and wiped the sweat on her forehead. She turned around and asked, Young master, we're already in the city. What do you want to do? As she spoke, the fragrance of a steamed bun wafted over from a nearby store. The child couldn't help but look over and secretly spit. I'll. Zhang Xiaohua instantly understood and couldn't help but secretly want to hit herself. That thing just now must be Xiaohua Ji's ration for today. He hasn't eaten yet, but I ate it first. I wanted to let him have a good meal at noon, but I didn't expect that he hasn't eaten in the morning. The sweat on his forehead is probably from hunger. With this thought, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, The first thing to do after entering the city is of course to eat. This young master hasn't eaten breakfast yet. Let's go, I'll treat you to some steamed buns. With that, she walked towards the steamed bun store first. Although Xiaohua Ji was young, she had been outside for a few years. How could she not know Zhang Xiaohua's thoughts at this time? Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's back, she gratefully followed. Unfortunately, she didn't know that the young master in front of her was just a fake. Otherwise, she would have dragged him to a restaurant long ago. The vendor selling steamed buns was also a perceptive person. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's dress, she hurriedly shouted, This young master, do you want to eat some steamed buns? Come and have a taste. You're used to eating fish and meat. Eat some of our vegetable buns. It's good for the body. After that, she looked at the dirty little table awkwardly. She didn't know if she should let Zhang Xiaohua sit down. Zhang Xiaohua didn't mind and sat down. Xiaohua Ji followed and stood beside Zhang Xiaohua. She didn't know whether she should sit or stand. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Sit down, Ji Xiaohua. Don't be polite. Thank you for calling me young master several times. Today I'll treat you to some steamed buns." Ji Xiaohua sat down obediently. She sat at the end of the bench far away from Zhang Xiaohua. To be honest, it was one thing to work for a young master and another to eat with him. She heard that rich families had rules when eating. This was the first time she ate with a young master. Moreover, they were eating meat buns that she had been craving for. How could she not be careful? Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua didn't say much. She said to the vendor, "Give me 4 steamed buns and 6 steamed buns." The vendor happily said, "Okay, I'll give it to you right away." After that, she took 2 trays from the top of the 2 tower-like steamers. She picked them up and gave them to the 2 of them. Zhang Xiaohua saw Ji Xiaohua staring at the fragrant steamed buns. She smiled and pushed the 4 steamed buns in front of him. Ji Xiaohua's eyes were a little disappointed. She reluctantly looked at the steamed buns in front of Zhang Xiaohua. She swallowed her saliva and asked, "Young master, you eat first." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Let's eat together." After that, she picked up a pair of chopsticks from the table. Seeing this, Ji Xiaohua hurriedly said, "Young master, wait." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and looked at Ji Xiaohua strangely. Ji Xiaohua took the chopsticks from Zhang Xiaohua's hand and skillfully picked up the tea from the table. After it was slightly hot, he handed it to Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua was a little helpless. Why was this young master not reliable at all? That's right, when did Zhang Xiaohua eat so delicately? Seeing Zhang Xiaohua pick up a steamed meat bun, Ji Xiaohua quickly picked up the chopsticks from the table, picked up a steamed vegetable bun, and took a bite. The steamed bun had just been taken from the fire. Although the outside was cold, the inside was very hot. Ji Xiaohua had very little experience in eating steamed buns. How could he know that it was so hot that his mouth kept sucking in cold air? Even so, he was reluctant to spit out the steamed bun in his mouth. Zhang Xiaohua looked at him and smiled. She reached out and poured a glass of water for him and said, "Drink some water, and it won't be hot." Ji Xiaohua quickly stood up and muttered, "Young master, how can I let you pour water?" Zhang Xiaohua raised her hand and motioned for him to sit down and handed the water to him. Ji Xiaohua took it and quickly drank it, then drank it in one gulp. Although he was boiling water in the tea shed, he didn't dare to casually drink the water. He had been busy from morning until now and hadn't had a sip of water. How could he not be thirsty? Ji Xiaohua blew on the steamed vegetable bun while eating it. He was about to eat the second one when Zhang Xiaohua smiled and pushed the steamed meat bun beside her to him and said, "Eat the meat bun now." Ji Xiaohua was stunned and didn't understand what was going on. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "You eat first. We'll talk while eating." After receiving the order to eat, how could Ji Xiaohua still be reserved? He picked up the meat bun and began to eat. Fortunately, he had the experience of eating the steamed vegetable bun just now, so his mouth wasn't scalded by the meat bun. Zhang Xiaohua saw that he was eating happily and said, "When I was young, the first time I ate a meat bun, I scalded my mouth and had diarrhea. Later, I heard people say that if the stomach doesn't eat meat for a long time, it's best to eat some vegetables first, and then eat meat. That's why I let you eat a meat bun first." Ji Xiaohua suddenly understood. With a meat bun in his mouth, he muttered, "Young master knows a lot." Zhang Xiaohua curled her lips. Nonsense, how could he not know the experience that was exchanged with diarrhea? After Ji Xiaohua ate 3 meat buns, Zhang Xiaohua didn't let him eat any more and said, "Okay, if you eat too much, your stomach will feel uncomfortable. Pack up the rest of the buns. It won't be too late to eat when you're hungry later." Ji Xiaohua was overjoyed and hurriedly and carefully put away the rest of the buns. Seeing Ji Xiaohua's careful appearance, Zhang Xiaohua felt very strange and asked, "We'll eat in a while, you don't have to be so serious." Ji Xiaohua looked up and said seriously, I'm already full. I want to bring this back for my mother to eat. The word mother made Zhang Xiaohua's nose sour again. She didn't know who was missing her, or who thought that she had already passed away and was sadly missing her mother. He waved his hand and said to the vendor, Waiter, pack up 2 more trays of steamed buns for me, 1 for vegetables and 1 for meat. Ji Xiaohua curiously asked, Young master, you didn't eat a single one just now. Could it be that you're waiting to eat on the road? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, This is for you to bring back to your mother. Ah? Ji Xiaohua couldn't believe her ears and said, Is this true? Yes, why would I lie to you? This is 40 copper coins. Young master, you're so generous? Ah? 40 copper coins, ah. I thought it was 36 copper coins. AI, this world is not like the old days. Forget it, I'll be generous this time. Zhang Xiaohua paid the bill. Xiaohua nimbly packed up the steamed buns and asked, Young master, it's time to get down to business. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the things in his hands and said with a smile, Don't worry, my business is very easy. Take back the things in your hands first, then we'll talk. Okay, mother probably hasn't eaten anything either. It's just right to send it back now. Xiaohua was overjoyed at this turn of events. Ji Xiaohua's house was in the south of Songning City. Although it was in the city, it was a shabby little courtyard with leaky little houses everywhere. It was even worse than Zhang Xiaohua's Guozhuang house. Zhang Xiaohua didn't enter the house and just stayed in the courtyard. He didn't feel any discomfort, but Ji Xiaohua wouldn't let him in no matter what, saying that it would be too slow to treat Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense had already swept through the shabby house. There was only a middle-aged woman with grizzled hair inside. She was curled up on the bed and coughed from time to time. Although she tried her best to endure, how could she endure it? In Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense, he seemed to see that woman spit out traces of blood. Zhang Xiaohua sighed and thought of his grandmother. Wasn't she like this in the past? Therefore, the peak of martial arts should be comparable to the 5th or 6th layer of the Immortal Path's chi refining stage. Moreover, the chi of heaven and earth was insufficient now, so magic could not display its power. Of course, it was inferior to martial arts. Of course, Zhang Xiaohua now felt that he couldn't compare with Openg, Chang'an, and the others, but he was belittling himself. He already had the earth escape, the fire escape, and the flying sword. He was already in an invincible position. If he couldn't beat them, he could escape. There was also a tourist who said that Zhang Xiaohua's strength was amazing. It should be the effect of the wrist guard. Why didn't I mention it in the book? I think that other books write it so clearly. It's obvious that it's like some TV dramas nowadays, treating the audience as everything needs to be explained or narrated. I'm afraid that the audience doesn't understand or know, so I didn't write it. Actually, the readers are very smart. Even if I didn't mention it, wouldn't the tourists know? Oh right, I also forgot the martial arts moves. First, it highlighted that Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts practice was different. Second, if a few words could explain the moves, then there would be no need for a master to teach. Especially if the men's football team was given a training manual, they would have dominated the World Cup. And it seems that the so-called training in the country should be world-class. -3. Chapter 319. Zhang Xiaohua held a long sword in her hand and crossed her hands in front of her body. She looked up at the many white clouds floating in the sky. No one knew what she was thinking. Xiaohuaji took the steamed buns and happily walked into the small house. Mother, look what I brought back for you! Just as she stepped into the small house, Xiaohuaji shouted. Xiaohua, why did you come back so early? Ji Xiaohua's mother asked strangely, ignoring her question. Mother, I met a young master in the tea shed. He asked me to take him to do something. He also said that he would give me 10 coins a day. Oh, it's 11 coins. Look, these are the steamed buns he invited me to eat. He also asked me to bring back 2 trays for you. What? Who told you to run out of the tea shed so easily? I asked Father Hao, who was on the streets, to find it for you. It was not easy. This, mother, I know, but, no buts. You really have guts. Who dares to believe you? If others deceive you, how do you want mother to live? Mother, this young master is really good, and the shopkeeper of the tea shed already doesn't let me go there anymore. You, Xiaohua, why don't you let mother worry? After speaking, she struggled to get up from the bed. Xiaohua Ji hurriedly stepped forward to support her and said, Mother, you rest, I will feed you steamed buns. Xiaohua Ji's mother didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said, You, Xiaohua, why can't you grow up? What's wrong? Mother. Xiaohua Ji was very puzzled. Xiaohua Ji's mother lovingly looked at her son, who was just 9 years old. She knew that he was still very childish. She explained, He is the young master of a large family. He came to our house and gave us something to eat. No matter what, we have to meet him and thank him, and, after pausing for a moment, she continued, In the end, he is a stranger. Mother also needs to meet him. Don't let him deceive you. Ji Xiaohua sensibly nodded her head. She helped her mother get her outer garment and shoes, and then helped her mother out of the room. When Zhang Xiaohua saw him come out, she quickly went forward and wanted to greet him. The woman rushed to greet him and said, Young master, this lowly concubine Zhang greets young master. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly returned the greeting and said, Auntie, you're welcome. You're not in good health, so you should rest in the house. Madame Zhang was in her 30s, but her hair was already white. At first glance, she looked even older than Gua Sufei a few years ago. It was no wonder that Zhang Xiaohua called her auntie the moment she arrived. In fact, he didn't know what to call her. Mrs. Zhang smiled bitterly and said, Young master, don't be like this. This lowly concubine can't afford it. Just call me Mrs. Zhang. As he spoke, he coughed a few more times. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Then it's better to call you Aunt Zhang. Madame Zhang repeatedly said that she didn't dare. Then, she carefully sized up Zhang Xiaohua and thought to herself, This young master is not bad. He is very approachable and doesn't have the air of a young master. Look at the long robe he is wearing, which is unique in Songning City. Moreover, he looks very kind and doesn't have a trace of darkness. Just looking at him makes people feel at ease. Nonsense, this fellow was originally a kind-hearted country boy. How could he have the misgivings in Madame Zhang's heart? Madame Zhang coughed for a while and said, What does young master want Xiaohua to do for you? If it's convenient, can you tell this lowly concubine? When Zhang Xiaohua heard the two words, Xiaohua, he felt both strange and familiar. He smiled and said, It's nothing. Aunt Zhang, I'm not from here. Just now, I was almost cheated in Ji Shihua's tea house. Thanks to Ji Shihua's reminder, I thought that I might encounter some trouble in Songning town, so I wanted to find a local to guide me and help me bargain so that people wouldn't cheat me. I saw that Ji Xiaohua is very clever and dutiful, so I wanted him to help me. However, I also caused him to be fired by the tea house owner. Don't worry, I will compensate him. Zhang Xiaohua kept saying, Ji Xiaohua. But he couldn't say the two words, Xiaohua. No matter what. When Madame Zhang heard this, a stone fell to the ground. She coughed and said, In that case, let Xiaohua follow young master for a few days. However, don't mention the compensation. Since he helped young master, he can only take young master's share of the money. Xiaohua should understand this. Zhang Xiaohua waved his hand and said, It's fine, Aunt Zhang. Actually, it's just helping me buy a horse and asking about some things. It won't take a few days, probably half a day. Madame Zheng's expression didn't change, but Ji Xiaohua next to her was greatly disappointed. He wanted to earn more money, but today, he only earned 11 copper coins. Madame Zhang turned to Xiaohua and said, Xiaohua, go and follow young master. Be careful and don't get cheated. Go quickly and come back quickly. Ji Xiaohua nodded his head and stood beside Zhang Xiaohua. After Zhang Xiaohua saluted Madame Zhang, he took Ji Xiaohua out of the small courtyard. When they walked out of the small courtyard, Ji Xiaohua deliberately turned his head and shouted, Yangqin, eat the steamed buns while they're hot. By the way, eat a vegetable steamed bun first, then eat a meat steamed bun. Madame Zhang coughed and nodded her head with a smile, but her footsteps didn't slow down even half an inch. After leaving Ji Shihua's house, the first thing Zhang Xiaohua did was to ask him to bring her to a ready-made clothing store. She bought a set of very ordinary clothes and wore them outside. That was because anyone who wore strange clothes would be stared at wherever they went. The first thing Zhang Xiaohua did was to find ordinary clothes to change into. However, Zhang Xiaohua was already immune to cold and heat. That black robe was obviously a good thing. He took it and was willing to take it off. He just wore it inside. As the saying goes, people rely on their clothes and horses rely on their saddle. When Zhang Xiaohua changed into ordinary clothes, he immediately became ordinary. He no longer had the aura of a young master. Ji Xiaohua praised from the side. "Young master, you're really amazing. After changing your clothes, you look like an ordinary person and not a young master." Zhang Xiaohua curled his lips and secretly said, "Isn't this nonsense? He doesn't look like a young master. He's just an ordinary person. Where did this young master come from?" After changing the clothes, the effect was obvious. On the street, no one looked at the two ordinary young people. Even when Zhang Xiaohua and others came to the horse market to choose horses, no one paid attention to them. Fortunately, Xiaohua was a local and was very familiar with this place. Not long after, he helped them find a shop with a good reputation. The shop assistant's attitude towards the two was average and didn't discriminate too much. This made Zhang Xiaohua very satisfied. However, when it came to choosing horses, the shop assistant was very dissatisfied. Why? No matter what horse the shop assistant recommended, the tall and seemingly inconspicuous young man shook his head and didn't even take a step closer. After looking at 8 horses in a row, the shop assistant was very tired. Even Xiaohua, who was standing at the side and preparing to help bargain, was full of doubts. In the end, the shop assistant couldn't take it anymore and asked, "Brother, are you here to make trouble or to buy horses? I've already taken 8 horses, and you said no after taking a look. You didn't even walk close. How do you know that it's not to your liking?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "It's not that I can't forget you, but these horses are not suitable. The horses I want are not ordinary horses." The shop assistant was surprised and said, "If it's not an ordinary flattery, then what should it be like?" After thinking, Zhang Xiaohua said, "It should be the kind that can carry heavy loads." "Heavy loads?" The shop assistant was stunned and said, "How heavy should it be?" "Oh, 3 to 4,000 caddies." "What? 3 to 4,000 caddies, not 3 to 400 caddies?" The shop assistant said in disbelief. "Are you sure?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, "Yes, it's 1,000 caddies, not 100 caddies." The shop assistant shook his head like a rattledrum and said, "That's impossible. I've never heard of a horse that can carry 3 to 4,000 caddies. You want a cow, right?" "Oh no, the legendary camel." Ji Xiaohua, who was standing at the side, seemed to understand at this time. She looked thoughtfully at the long sword in Zhang Xiaohua's hand. The shop assistant only thought that Zhang Xiaohua was tricking him and didn't take it to heart. He was about to greet the other customers when Xiaohua hurried forward and said with a smile, "Big brother, don't misunderstand. My family's young master has some special requirements. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come to your shop. Is your shopkeeper here? Perhaps the old man has some ideas?" Ji Xiaohua was not very old. In the eyes of the waiter, he was just a clever page boy. The waiter pondered for a while and then went into the inner room. Not long after, a tall and sturdy man came out from the inner room. He frowned and looked at the inconspicuous Zhang Xiaohua from head to toe. Then he asked, "Young master? The horse you want is really not available in this shop. Why don't you go to another stables to look?" Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and cupped her hands and said, "Then I'll have to trouble shopkeeper. By the way, can you let me see your best horse?" "This?" The sturdy man hesitated. Ji Xiaohua smiled and said, "Shopkeeper, don't be afraid. If it suits my family's young master, you will be rewarded." Quickly go and bring it over. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she also understood the shopkeeper's meaning. She wanted to take out the banknotes from her purse and show it to the shopkeeper, but he didn't know how much the best horse cost. If she rashly took out the banknotes, if it was less, wouldn't it be very embarrassing? Seeing Ji Xiaohua deal with it so calmly, she pursed her lips and smiled without saying anything. The sturdy man hesitated for a moment and said with a smile, "It's okay. I just want to take a look. Young master, please follow me to the back to take a look." Zhang Xiaohua looked at Ji Xiaohua with satisfaction and followed the sturdy man to the back. After turning a few small aisles, they entered a large courtyard. At a glance, there were dozens of tall horses in this courtyard. However, they couldn't use their divine sense to recognize the horses. Otherwise, wouldn't Zhang Xiaohua be able to sweep them away? Just when Zhang Xiaohua was overwhelmed, the sturdy man turned around and said, "Young master, please come with me." After that, he brought Zhang Xiaohua to a stable in the corner facing the sun. He saw that there was a tall and beautiful date red horse tied to the stable. Although Zhang Xiaohua didn't know much about horses, he could roughly tell whether it was good or bad. This horse was obviously not on the same level as the one the shopkeeper brought over. "Please add it to your collection, please give it a tip, thank you." -3. Chapter 320. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Shopkeeper is really hiding something. Compared to what I saw just now, it's much better." The man was not embarrassed as he laughed and said, "This kind of horse is my favorite, how could I casually give it away? If it wasn't for the fact that young master really loves horses and sincerely asked for it, how could I bear to part with it? Bullshit, isn't it just to buy more money? How do I look like someone who loves horses? I just want to find a horse that can carry a sword. Hey. Zhang Xiaohua silently cursed in her heart. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "I don't know if this one can come closer to take a look?" The man said, "Of course, but young master should be careful. This horse's temper is very fierce and it won't submit to people. It wasn't easy for this one to subdue it." Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand, indicating that it was fine. She slowly walked closer. This was a good horse with a fat body. It could be seen at a glance. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua walk closer, the horse's eyes revealed a vigilant look. Its hind legs also trembled, eager to try. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, she stopped and turned her head to ask, "Shopkeeper, can I touch it?" The man smiled and said, "Of course you can." He quickly walked in front of the date red horse and took the reins. He used his hand to comb the horse's mane and the horse immediately became docile. However, its hooves kept kicking the ground as if it was warning Zhang Xiaohua. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, she walked in front of the horse and stroked the back of the date red horse. The mane was very soft and very comfortable to touch. Xiaohua curiously walked forward and looked at the date red horse with envy. Zhang Xiaohua stroked it for a while and then gave a look to Ji Xiaohua. Ji Xiaohua was stunned, but she immediately understood. She walked behind the man and asked, "Shopkeeper, this one has something to ask." When the man heard this, he unconsciously turned around and said, "Little brother, what is the problem? But please tell me." While he was turning around, Zhang Xiaohua exerted force with her hands. The date red horse's legs went soft, and it almost fell to the ground. Then it raised its head and let out a sad neigh. Zhang Xiaohua quickly pulled back her hands and put them behind her back. Before the burly man could finish his question, he heard the neigh of a horse. His expression changed and he quickly turned around. At this time, the date red horse had already stood up. Its forelegs were slightly trembling and its head was shaking uneasily. It looked at Zhang Xiaohua with eyes full of fear. Zhang Xiaohua stood aside with her arms folded, looking like she had nothing to do with it. The burly man looked at the restless date red horse and then looked at Zhang Xiaohua's tall and thin figure. She looked harmless to humans and animals. He was a little puzzled and quickly comforted his beloved BMW. Ji Xiaohua, on the other hand, saw everything clearly, and her heart couldn't help but be filled with astonishment. On the side of the road in Songning Town, he couldn't even pick up that unremarkable sword even after using all of his strength. Just now, this thin and weak used 2 hands pressed down on the tall horse until it almost went limp. In addition, he had just said that he could carry a horse that weighed several thousand jin. He wasn't a fool, so how could he not know about this youth's strange state? When the burly man turned around, Ji Xiaohua's heart calmed down a little. "Little brother, do you have any questions that I need to answer?" Ji Xiaohua had an idea and said, "I wonder what price the shopkeeper will give for this divine horse." When the shopkeeper heard this, he immediately became spirited and mysteriously stretched out a finger. Ji Xiaohua let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, 10 taels of silver. Although Ji Xiaohua also grew up in the southern part of the city, she had only seen other people's transactions from afar and didn't know the specific market price. She only felt that the high price of 10 taels of silver was already out of her expectations. Zhang Xiaohua had never bought anything before, but the last time he bought a long sword from He Tianshu, he had spent 7 taels of silver. How could this handsome date red horse only be worth 10 taels of silver? However, she already didn't plan on buying this horse, so she didn't say anything. When the shopkeeper heard this, his expression slightly changed and he said with a smile, "Little brother really knows how to joke. A mere 10 taels of silver can only buy a meal. How can it buy this BMW? Ah? Could it be that you want 100 taels?" Ji Xiaohua clenched her teeth and said a number that she couldn't imagine. No. The shopkeeper shook his head. "Oh, it's less than 100 taels. Little brother, you're wrong. It's 1,000 taels." The shopkeeper said to Ji Xiaohua with a smile, but his eyes looked at Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua was also shocked and secretly said, "It's quite dark. It's better to rob." You. Ji Xiaohua didn't know what to say and only used her little finger to point at the brawny man. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua didn't plan to stay any longer. She smiled and cupped her hands. "Shopkeeper, thank you for showing us such a divine horse. It's a pity that I don't have enough money. It's better to go to another store to have a look." After saying that, he smiled and led Ji Xiaohua back the way they came. Seeing this, the shopkeeper hurriedly followed and said, "Young master, if you don't have enough cash, you can let the waiter follow you back to get it." Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua ignored him, he said, "Well, seeing that young master really wants to buy it, I have to reluctantly give it up. 800 taels, I can't go any lower. Young master, what do you think?" After that, he actually followed Zhang Xiaohua and lowered the price again and again until it was 200 taels. Zhang Xiaohua actually didn't know how much the horse was worth. She just made up her mind not to buy it. She let the shopkeeper keep lowering the price, but she didn't say anything. Finally, when they reached the door, the shopkeeper was anxious and said, "Young master, how much are you willing to pay?" Zhang Xiaohua stopped and wanted to haggle with him for 10 taels. But after thinking about it, why bother? It wasn't easy for others to buy it. She didn't plan to buy it. Why did she have to tease him? Thinking of this, she shook her head with a smile and went straight out. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua like this, the shopkeeper didn't chase after her. He shrugged, changed his expression, and continued to do his business. Zhang Xiaohua walked for a while with Ji Xiaohua. Suddenly she stopped and asked, "Ji Xiaohua, aren't you leading me? Why did you let me walk in front?" When Ji Xiaohua heard this, she hurriedly smiled apologetically and said, "Young master walked very fast. This little one couldn't catch up." After saying this, she hurriedly walked in front and led Zhang Xiaohua to another place. At this moment, in Ji Xiaohua's eyes, Zhang Xiaohua was no longer a kind-hearted and good-natured hedonistic son of rich parents. Instead, he was a person covered in a mysterious halo. After walking for a while, as expected, there was the sound of a horse neighing again. However, Ji Xiaohua turned around and said, "Young master, the Jade Gate Horse Company we just went to is the largest in Songning Town and has the best reputation. If there isn't anything to your liking, I reckon that the other 2 places don't have it either." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, "I was careless. I didn't think that the horse couldn't bear the weight." Ji Xiaohua was speechless. This sentence sounded a bit like a young master's. Indeed, the other two places didn't have as many horses as the previous one. The horses didn't look as good as the previous one, and the starting price was even higher. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't be bothered to try it out. After a few words, he left. When Ji Xiaohua saw that she didn't help Zhang Xiaohua, she was unhappy and walked with her head lowered. Looking at the sun in the sky, Ji Xiaohua forced a smile and said, "Young master, what do you think is next?" Seeing that Ji Xiaohua wasn't happy, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "The next thing is simple. I want to know how to get to Pingyang City or Lu Town. Where do you think I should go?" When Ji Xiaohua heard this, she thought for a while and said with a smile, "This little one knows. Young master, please follow me." After saying this, she brought Zhang Xiaohua to the front of a tea house. Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand and said, "Can this kind of information be found in this tea house?" Ji Xiaohua smiled and said, "Young master, don't be anxious. In this Jing city, there are only tea houses and wine shops that are well informed. But if you have to follow along, it's better for you to go by yourself. Why would you need me? Please take a seat in this tea house, brew a pot of good tea and enjoy it carefully. Wait for me to go and find out for you. What do you think?" "Ah, is that so?" Zhang Xiaohua really didn't enjoy such treatment. He touched his chin and said with a smile, "Okay, Ji Xiaohua, if you can find out more details, I'll reward you with more copper coins." Ji Xiaohua smiled and said, "That's good. Young man, come with me." Afterwards, Ji Xiaohua led Zhang Xiaohua to the tea house and ordered some tea for him. She asked around in the tea house and then quickly ran out again. Zhang Xiaohua sat under the sun, basking in the warm sun as he tasted the fragrant tea and waited quietly. It seemed that at this moment, he finally understood the true meaning of silver. In his mind, he removed the equating sign between silver and food. Sigh. He sighed and looked away from the steam rising from the teacup to the bustling crowd on the street outside the tea house. He couldn't help but feel a sense of realization. Humans, in the blink of an eye, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to be in a trance. His consciousness rose up high and watched the people on the street. Gradually, there were more and more people on several streets. Later, he saw the entire Songning town and the entire town. He also seemed to see Xiaohua running around busily. However, these people slowly became as small as ants in Zhang Xiaohua's eyes. Their actions were extremely laughable. Zhang Xiaohua's consciousness rose higher and higher. He felt like a white cloud floating in the sky. Everything on the ground had nothing to do with him. His heart only yearned for that freedom. In the tea house, Zhang Xiaohua's body held the teacup in his left hand under the sunlight. He didn't move at all and didn't even blink. He actually had an otherworldly appearance. There was a faint flicker of brilliance and sometimes, there was even a hint of transparency. Zhang Xiaohua's consciousness rose higher and higher. He actually saw the sea, the ships on the sea, and the islands that were like black dots. In Zhang Xiaohua's heart, there was no trace of emotion. He just rose up like that. Suddenly, a thunderous voice resounded through the world. "Young master, what are you doing?" In the blink of an eye, Zhang Xiaohua's consciousness, which had floated high, suddenly fell down. The situation just now seemed to be rewinding. He fell to the ground. In an instant, he fell from the ninth heaven to the tea house. Zhang Xiaohua's body didn't move. His eyes immediately lit up. He blinked and saw Xiaohua beside him looking at him with a face full of fear. The boiling hot teacup in his hand was already cold. The noon sun had already passed the top of his head. -3. Chapter 321. Zhang Xiaohua smiled. Only then did he realize that the boiling hot teacup in his hand had already turned cold. The noon sun had already passed over his head, and his body, which was sitting under the sunlight, was gradually moving into the shadows. That fleeting moment had actually taken such a long time? Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but frown. He felt that it had only been a few breaths of time. This feeling was really very strange. After carefully savoring that mysterious feeling, Zhang Xiaohua had a kind of understanding in his heart. It was an indescribable feeling. Then, with a thought, he secretly checked the cultivation of the Heart Sutra. Sure enough, the stagnant cultivation had already shown signs of loosening. It was as if he could see the light of the sixth layer. Zhang Xiaohua was very emotional. In the past, he had to painstakingly absorb the vitality in vitality stones in order to advance a little. Just now, in just a few breaths of time, his cultivation, which had been unable to advance no matter how much vitality he absorbed, had advanced a solid step forward. It seemed that the cultivation methods of the middle and early stages of the Qi refinement realm were still very different. Thinking about the situation just now, Zhang Xiaohua still felt some lingering fear. He wasn't too sure if this situation was lucky or unlucky. He only knew that if Ji Xiaohua had called him a little later, perhaps his consciousness really would have flown beyond the 9 heavens. Misfortune is where fortune lies. Fortune lies where misfortune lies. Zhang Xiaohua looked at Ji Xiaohua's childish and anxious face and felt very emotional. He had only come to Songning Town to inquire about the way home, but he had met this child who had the same name as him, and so many things had happened. The improvement of his mental state and the increase of his cultivation were real matters. All of this was inextricably linked to Ji Xiaohua. However, what could he do for him? Although he knew how to refine pills, he only had a pile of fasting pills. He didn't have any immortal pills for living people or pills for curing illnesses. Although he cultivated the path of immortality, he only knew how to kill people. What could he help him with? Just as he was thinking, Xiaohua called out again. "Young master, are you all right?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "How could I be all right? I'm fine, I'm fine." Then he called out, "Waiter, give me some desserts." "All right," the shop assistant in the distance replied cheerfully. But in his heart he secretly thought, "This guy must be a fake young master. He didn't even drink a cup of tea and sat there for the whole afternoon. Isn't it because he's afraid of eating too much snacks?" When he saw that his companions were here, he quickly ordered one. "Hee, I've seen a lot of people like him." Zhang Xiaohua pointed at the stool and said, "Ji Xiaohua, have a seat. You look exhausted. Drink some water first and have some snacks later." After that, he picked up the teapot and poured some water for Xiaohua. Ji Xiaohua didn't dare to sit down and rushed to pour herself. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "You'd better do it. I want to thank you with this cup of water." Xiaohua said shyly, "Young master, you're welcome. Didn't you want me to do something for you?" Zhang Xiaohua reached out and patted him on the shoulder to let him sit down. She put the poured tea in front of him and said, "I have something else to thank you for." "Ah?" Xiaohua said in surprise. "Young master is amazing." "You already know?" Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously. "What do I know? Is this not what young master is talking about?" Xiaohua said as she carefully took out a piece of white cloth. "What is this?" Zhang Xiaohua asked. "So young master doesn't know." "Know what? How would I know? If you don't tell me, of course I don't know. Only if you tell me will I know." Zhang Xiaohua was in a good mood and chatted with Ji Xiaohua. At this moment, the waiter served the fragrant pastries. Zhang Xiaohua pointed at the pastries and said, "This is also to thank you. Eat to your heart's content." Xiaohua stuck out her tongue and swallowed her saliva. She said, "Young master Xie, you should take a look at this first." Zhang Xiaohua took the white cloth and unfolded it. On the upper right corner were the words, Songning Town, and on the lower left corner were Pingyang City and Lu Town. In the middle were a few other names. In between these names, there were many lines drawn. Could this be the route from Songning Town to Lu Town and Pingyang City? Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's surprised expression, Ji Xiaohua was very pleased. As he ate the desserts, he said, "Young master, the Pingyang City that you mentioned is really far away. I've asked a few people and they all told me different things. However, this route is what most of them said. Moreover, it's really a coincidence that someone in Lu Town had gone there to sell silk before and found out about it." "Silk? Why didn't I know that Lu Town produces silk?" "Hee, young master, it's just fake silk. Oh, I see. Subsequently, Xiaohua continued. I could have come back earlier, but I thought that if I told you, you might forget in a while. I wanted to draw one myself, but it was like a cat scratching. I had no choice but to find a street artist to help me draw it. Following that, she took a big bite of the crispy pastry and said angrily, That guy actually took advantage of the situation to increase the price and asked me for 3 copper coins. It's more expensive than a New Year's painting. Oh, young master, I'll pay for these 3 copper coins. You don't have to worry about it. I didn't even manage to buy a horse just now. I feel sorry for making you come here for nothing. Zhang Xiaohua listened with interest. If you paid for it yourself, why did you tell me the price of this white cloth? This guy is really clever. He's much better than me when I was young. However, looking at the very detailed lines drawn on the white cloth, why would Zhang Xiaohua care about this little trick? It was smart of him to only do this little trick. There were many lines on the white cloth, but Zhang Xiaohua already understood them with just a glance. They were deeply imprinted in his mind. However, he still carefully folded the white cloth and kept it in his arms. Seeing this, Xiaohua smiled even more brightly, as if she had received the biggest reward for her hard work. After eating half of the pastry, Xiaohua stopped eating. Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, It's already noon. Is this enough for you? It's enough, it's enough. I'm small and my stomach is small. I'm already full. Okay. Now that you're full, come with me to do something else. After Zhang Xiaohua finished speaking, he got up and was about to leave. At this moment, Xiaohua asked softly, Young master, can I take the rest of the pastry away? Zhang Xiaohua stared blankly and said repeatedly, Yes, of course you can. Xiaohua hurriedly took out a very clean handkerchief from his arms and carefully wrapped up the remaining pastry, keeping it in his arms. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and didn't say anything, letting the waiter settle the bill. After leaving, Xiaohua asked, Young master, where are we going next? A bank. Songning Town was different from Lu Town. It was close to the harbor and had a very developed business. There were several banks alone. Zhang Xiaohua didn't care about it, so Ji Xiaohua went to the nearest one. This bank wasn't big and had few customers, which suited Zhang Xiaohua very well. Unlike other places, the bank didn't have any waiter to serve customers, only a tall counter. It was Zhang Xiaohua's first time coming to this kind of place. Looking at Ji Xiaohua, who was also looking around, it must be her first time as well. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the solemn old man behind the counter, took out a banknote, and handed it over. The old man with a grizzled beard was expressionless. He reached out to take it, but when he opened it, he frowned. That's right. Most of the customers who came to the bank would exchange large amounts of silver for banknotes for convenience of carrying around, or exchange banknotes for silver. The bank would take a cut from each transaction. Only when the amount was large would it be worth it. Although this small bank was small in scale, the banknotes that the old man saw were mostly in the hundreds and thousands of denominations. None of them were like the banknotes in front of him, which were only 5 taels. 5 taels was fine, but this banknote wasn't issued by his own bank. If it wasn't a banknote from his family, the old man could refuse to exchange it. However, the bank that issued the banknotes was a rather large one. Although the head office of this bank was far away, it had an alliance with his family. Thus, he had to exchange it for the old man. Furthermore, he couldn't ask for more. The old man thought for a while, then went through the necessary procedures with Zhang Xiaohua, and put the 5 taels of silver on the counter. Zhang Xiaohua was about to say something, but the old man said first, I'll have to trouble this customer to pay a fee of 1 tael of silver first. 1 tael of silver? Fee? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and said, I give you banknotes, and you give me silver. Why should I pay you a fee? The old man was helpless. Seeing that there weren't many customers in the bank, he patiently explained the details. After listening to the old man's general financial knowledge, Zhang Xiaohua was enlightened. This banknote was convenient to carry, but the price was not small. Ai. Zhang Xiaohua sighed. She had a pile of gold in her purse, but it wasn't suitable to take it out now. She could only bite the bullet and let the bank rip her off. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said to the old man, "This old man, I want to exchange this 5 taels of silver for 1 tael of silver. What do you think?" "Oh right, this exchange doesn't have a fee, right?" The old man looked at Zhang Xiaohua and said, "This isn't necessary." "Then will your fee be paid from these scattered silver taels?" Zhang Xiaohua gave a thumbs up and said, "Old man is wise." That's exactly what this one meant. The old man was a little happy from this straightforward flattery. The corner of his mouth revealed a trace of a smile and said, "I've been working at this counter for dozens of years. What kind of people have I not seen? Just as you were about to lift your foot, I knew what you were going to shit." Zhang Xiaohua did not say anything, but Ji Xiaohua at the side laughed out loud. Zhang Xiaohua turned her head and rolled her eyes at Xiaohua. She did not dare to say anything as she was afraid that the old man would say something nice again. When the old man placed the scattered silver taels on the counter, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Old man, if I exchange these silver taels for other shares such as copper coins, will there be no fee?" The old man was stunned and said, "As long as the banknotes are exchanged for cash, no matter if it is silver or copper coins, there is only one fee. Why is this customer asking this?" Instantly, the old man had a bad feeling in his heart. Sure enough, Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and cheerfully said, "That's great. Please exchange these 5 taels of silver for copper coins. -3. Chapter 322. This? The old man from the bank was a little dumbfounded. He sat there for a moment, not knowing what to say. After a long while, he muttered, "Could it be that this guest came to our bank to find trouble?" Zhang Xiaohua was surprised. "I'm just taking my money. Who wouldn't have the patience to find trouble with you? Then take the money and go. Why do you need so many copper coins?" Zhang Xiaohua was even more surprised. "What's wrong with copper coins? I just like to spend copper coins." "What's wrong? Your bank is so big, but you don't even have 5 strings of copper coins?" This. The old man was also choked by her words. Zhang Xiaohua was right. The bank was famous for money. How could they not have some copper coins in reserve? However, the transactions in this bank were usually gold and silver. If you took a large amount of silver or gold notes, it was very normal. But the person in front of them took 5 taels of silver notes, and wanted to exchange them for 5 strings of copper coins, which was a big sum of 5,000 copper coins. This was unprecedented. "Are you a bank or not? Do you have copper coins?" Zhang Xiaohua was a little impatient. The old man came to his senses and confirmed. "Guest, do you really want to exchange them for copper coins?" "Yes, I want to exchange them for copper coins." The old man still persuaded. "Guest, when you go to the market to spend, you can just use the scattered silver. Why do you have to go through so much trouble?" Zhang Xiaohua insisted. "Isn't the wall of your bank written, 'Above Guest'? Can't you satisfy this small request of mine?" The old man looked at the 4 big words on the wall, and had no choice but to stand up and say, "Xiao San, Xiao Si, go and give this guest 5 strings of copper coins." "Wait." Zhang Xiaohua thought of something and took out 2 banknotes from his bosom. "By the way, old mister, can I trouble you to exchange one of these banknotes for a copper coin and the other for a copper coin?" "Ah." The old man was stunned. "Why do you want to exchange them?" "Yes? Don't tell me your bank doesn't have any copper coins?" "Sigh." The old man sighed helplessly. He waved his hand and said, "Xiao Si, you two go to the back and see if there are enough copper coins in our treasury." Fortunately, it didn't take long for them to hear groaning and groaning behind them. The 2 of them carried out a bunch of copper coins and walked to the back of the counter with great effort. They then used a lot of strength to place the coins on the tall counter. At this moment, the 2 of them had never complained more about who designed such a tall counter. Seeing the small mountain of copper coins on the counter, Zhang Xiaohua felt a little dizzy. He had never thought that 10 taels of silver could be exchanged for so many copper coins. Looking at the dozens of small pieces of silver on the side, they were also worth half of this mountain of copper coins. In an instant, Zhang Xiaohua's almost zero knowledge of finance was added with another thick stroke. Looking at so many copper coins, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and asked, "Old man, can your bank give me a big gunny sack?" The old man was already depressed enough from her harassment. He didn't say anything and waved his hand at Xiao San. Xiao San casually took out an old gunny sack from under his feet and threw it on the pile of money. Zhang Xiaohua didn't mind and happily took it. He put the 10,000 copper coins into the gunny sack and carried it with his hand. Then, he turned his hand and grabbed the dozens of small pieces of silver on the counter and put them into his bosom. Then, he quietly stood there. The old man saw that Zhang Xiaohua still didn't leave and frowned. "Guest, is there anything else?" Zhang Xiaohua was a little surprised. He opened his mouth to say something, but the old man quickly said, "Guest, you should hurry up and do your own things. Our bank really doesn't have any spare copper coins. Even if you want to exchange, you can't." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua chuckled and said, "Since you really don't have any, I won't exchange. However, your bank should carry more copper coins. Maybe I will exchange them tomorrow." The old man sat behind the counter and rolled his eyes. He almost fainted. He repeatedly waved his hand and said, "Guest, please walk slowly. I still have things to do, so I won't stand up." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "You really want me to leave now?" "Yes, guest, you should hurry up and leave." At this time, the old man no longer cared about the guest is above all. Chopped rules on the wall and said what was in his heart. "Okay, I will leave now." After that, Zhang Xiaohua easily picked up the big sack and turned to walk out of the bank. Behind him, Xiaohua was also puzzled. As soon as they walked out of the bank, Xiaohua quickly caught up with Zhang Xiaohua and whispered, "Young master, did you make a mistake just now?" "It seems that." Before Ji Xiaohua finished speaking, Zhang Xiaohua looked back and took Ji Xiaohua to run. He didn't care about the direction. After turning several intersections, he stopped and said with a smile, "I made a lot of money. I made a lot of money today. Today's money is worth a month of my time in Huanxi Mountain Villa." "Young master, what are you talking about? Why can't I understand? Is it because the bank doesn't have a commission?" Zhang Xiaohua didn't explain to him and said, "You are just a child. What do you know? Let's go." At this time in the bank, the old man just got out of his impetuous state and was leisurely tasting the fragrant tea. He seemed to feel that something was missing in his heart. Suddenly, he put the teacup on the table and asked, "Xiao San, Xiao Si, when you gave the young man the money just now, did you take out the commission?" The two of them looked at each other and explained, "The commission has always been taken by you. Of course, we will not snatch it from you." "Oh, I was confused by this little rascal just now and forgot to deduct the commission." After saying that, they hurriedly ran out of the bank and couldn't see him. The old man looked left and right but didn't see him. He stomped his feet and walked back. The two of them comforted him. "Don't be anxious, old man. Didn't that rascal say that he will come back tomorrow? We will ask him to return it tomorrow." "Return my ass. Didn't you see that the banknote says Pingyang City? This rascal is from another city. Who knows, he might leave the city in a while. Why would he come back tomorrow?" The two of them pursed their lips and said, "So old man knew that he was from another city. That's why you said that the commission was 1 copper coin. It's not like you don't have a share in it. What's there to be indignant about? Forget it, forget it. You have been hunting geese every day. Today you have been pecked in the eye by the geese. Go? Where do you want to go now, young master?" Xiaohua Ji asked very responsibly. Zhang Xiaohua held the long sword in one hand and the sack in the other. She didn't have a third hand to rub her chin. She thought for a while and said, "Let's go to your house first." Go to my house? Xiaohua Ji didn't understand. However, she still listened to Zhang Xiaohua Ji's words and turned to lead the way. At this moment, an old man wearing a felt hat and ragged clothes slowly walked over from the side. Behind him was a sluggish animal that looked neither like a mule nor a horse. The animal carried a pile of dry firewood on its back. Its fur was messy and dirty. There was even a large bald patch. An unpleasant smell could be smelled from afar. When Xiaohuaji saw the old man, she smiled and shouted from afar, "Old man, how did you go out to collect firewood again?" When the old man heard the voice, he raised his wrinkled old face and opened his turbid eyes. He looked around and said with dissatisfaction, "Xiaohua, why didn't you go to the tea shed to help today?" Xiaohuaji blushed and argued, "Old man, how, it's not that I didn't put in effort. It's just that the shopkeeper—" Old man Hao raised his hand and rubbed Xiaohuaji's little head. He sighed and said, "I know, Xiaohua. The shopkeeper is a little stingy. However, where can we, poor people, not be bullied? Tomorrow, I'll go and talk to you again. With my face, the tea house owner might be able to recognize me. You can earn as much as you can. The tea house has never been exposed to wind or rain, so it's very suitable for you." Seeing that old man Hao was educating Xiaohuaji, Zhang Xiaohua could only stand aside and listen. This was no different from the kind uncles and aunties in the Guizhuang house. Even if it wasn't their own child, they would do their best to help as long as they could. At this moment, the animal standing next to them opened its almost closed eyes and sniffed. It seemed to have smelled something. When it saw Zhang Xiaohua, its eyes seemed to brighten. Therefore, it dragged its feet and walked to Zhang Xiaohua. It raised its head and put its strange head in front of her. Although the animal smelled a little strange, Zhang Xiaohua grew up in the countryside. How could she be afraid of this? Zhang Xiaohua threw the sack on the ground and raised her hand to stroke the animal's head. The animal seemed to enjoy it very much. It even stuck out its tongue and licked Zhang Xiaohua's hand. Zhang Xiaohua felt itchy and very comfortable. When she looked at the animal's eyes again, Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. The animal's eyes seemed to be filled with longing, desire, and expectation. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't believe it. She rubbed her eyes with her hand. When she looked carefully again, sure enough, the half-closed and listless eyes were now wide open and quietly looking at her. The animal's eyes seemed to be intelligent, and seemed to be transmitting its thoughts. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua remembered to look carefully at the strange animal. The animal's face looked like a horse's. It was long, but there were two protrusions on its head, which seemed to be like antlers. Its hooves were large, similar to a cow's, or even larger. The big tail behind it was like a donkey's. This strange animal looked like a deer, but it was not a deer. It looked like a horse, but it was not a horse. It looked like a cow, but it was not a cow. It looked like a donkey, but it was not a donkey. What was it? Xiaohua listened to Father Hao's lecture. When she saw the animal licking Zhang Xiaohua's hand, she quickly went up and said, "Young master, stay away. Don't dirty your clothes." But when she saw that Zhang Xiaohua didn't seem to mind at all, she smiled and said, "Young master, Huan is the cutest. It's gentle and won't bite. You probably haven't come into contact with animals. Huan seems to like you very much." Then she said embarrassedly, "Although Huan smells, it will be very clean after washing. If you don't like it, I can wash it away now." Only then did Father Hao notice Zhang Xiaohua next to Xiaohua. He asked, "This young master is—" Ji Xiaohua told him the purpose of Zhang Xiaohua's visit. Father Hao smiled and nodded. -3. Chapter 323. Huan? Zhang Xiaohua looked at this dirty, strange animal with several bald patches of fur. She couldn't help but smile. She stroked the horns on Huan's head. Those were two bald horns. Ji Xiaohua saw that Zhang Xiaohua didn't dislike Huan and became happier. Zhang Xiaohua was about to ask him, but Old Man Hao said, "Xiaohua, you accompany the young master. I'll take Huan back." Xiaohua smiled and said, "The young master said he wanted to go to my house. Let's go together." Then she turned to Zhang Xiaohua and said, "Young master, put your sack on the firewood. Huan is very strong. She can carry it." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua's heart moved. She didn't show anything strange on her face. She reached out to pick up the sack from the ground and put it on Huan Huan's back. Sure enough, the animal didn't seem to feel anything. As the three walked, Ji Xiaohua told Zhang Xiaohua about Huan Huan. It turned out that Huan Huan didn't belong to Old Man Hao. Last year, when Xiaohua went to the mountain forest outside the city to collect firewood, she picked it up from a ravine. When Ji Xiaohua met Huan Huan, the horns on Huan Huan's head had been cut off. There were also a few arrows on its body, leaving a lot of blood. It didn't look like it would live. Ji Xiaohua happened to have some wound medicine with her. She applied it on Huan Huan and brought it back little by little from the mountain forest. However, Ji Xiaohua and Madame Zhang weren't good at raising animals, so they handed it over to Old Man Hao. After treatment, it was finally saved. Ji Xiaohua named it Huan Huan. Xiaohua's family didn't usually need this animal, so they left it with Old Man Hao. Every day, it would help Old Man Hao carry some things. During the busy farming season, it would also help other people in the fields. At this point, Xiaohua's heart also moved, and she said sincerely, "Young master, Huan Huan is very good at carrying things, but I don't know if it's to your liking. However, it's not like a horse, it's good at running, and if you ride it..." At this point, he couldn't continue. He really hoped that his Huan Huan could help Zhang Xiaohua. But if Zhang Xiaohua really rode this thing that was neither a donkey nor a horse, wouldn't she be ridiculed to death? Huan Huan seemed to be able to understand Xiaohua's words and was extremely unhappy. She struggled against the reins in his hands and let out a long cry to express her objection. Xiaohua Ji quickly patted Huan Huan's back to express her sympathy. Zhang Xiaohua was also depressed. Yes, who didn't like to wear bright clothes, ride a tall horse, and swagger through the streets? But even a tall horse couldn't carry a long sword. Even if Huan Huan could carry a long sword, if it couldn't run as fast as a tall horse, what use would he have for it? Right now, I just want to find a proper way to go home. Carrying such a heavy sword, even if I take a carriage, it's still inconvenient. I can only travel alone. Since I can't buy a horse, I can only travel alone. Alas, it's easy to use lightness skills in the forest where there's no one, but it's extremely inappropriate to use lightness skills along the main road. I've never heard of people in the martial arts world using lightness skills to travel along the official road in broad daylight. Yes, they don't use lightness skills to travel because they're afraid of exhausting their internal strength, but I'm not afraid. I have primordial stones to replenish the energy of heaven and earth. Why would I be afraid of running out of vital qi? Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes unconsciously lit up. But then he thought, if I used the levitation skill to travel from Soning Town to Luzhen Town, my name would have spread throughout the martial arts world. Forget it, I'll keep a low profile. If I'm looking for trouble for no reason, it's better to use the usual method to go back. There must be a reason why people in the martial arts world don't use lightness skills to travel. There must be a reason. Then, Zhang Xiaohua touched his chin and looked at Huan Huan. He didn't know if this monster could carry a long sword. Well, the most important thing was, could it run fast enough? As for whether riding this monster was ugly or not, he threw that thought to the back of his mind. He had ridden a donkey in the Guizhuang house before, so it didn't seem to be a bad thing. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua asked tentatively, "Xiaohua Ji, how heavy can Huan Huan carry?" "Young master, you have to ask Old Man Hao about this. I've never used Huan Huan like this." Old Man Hao, who was walking slowly in front, turned around and said, "Young master, I'm not boasting, but Huan Huan is really the best animal I've ever seen." The mule squeaked when it carried a little bit of firewood, but Huan Huan didn't respond at all. It's even good at plowing the fields. Not only can it walk steadily, but it also plows deeply. It often does the work of other cows for 2 days. Several farmers near the city want to buy it, but Xiaohua is unwilling to part with it. That's why I've been keeping it. After saying that, he sighed and said, "Actually, young master, to tell you the truth, how can this old man not know Xiaohua's thoughts? My house is so bare. If I have Huan Huan as my companion, it won't seem lonely. Moreover, I can use Huan Huan to carry firewood every day." When the farm is busy, Huan can help me get some pocket money. If I sell Huan, this old man's life will be more difficult. Xiaohuaji blushed and said, Old man Hao, I'm not so noble. When I saw Huan plowing the fields, I wasn't in a good mood. I knew it didn't like plowing, so I didn't sell it. If it entered someone else's house, wouldn't it have to plow the fields every day? Zhang Xiaohua smiled at the side and didn't say anything. The ugly Huan seemed to like Zhang Xiaohua very much. As it walked, it rubbed against Zhang Xiaohua. It sniffed his body and snorted from time to time. After walking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua asked tentatively, Xiaohuaji, you like Huan so much. If I want it, are you willing to sell it to me? Xiaohuaji stopped and slowed down. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's seemingly serious expression, he panicked first. He lowered his head, looked at the ground, and then at the reins in his hand, and said, Young master, you really want it, but Huan can't run fast but... He was a little incoherent, but then he raised his head, and his eyes became firmer. He said, Young master, if you really want to buy it, give me more money. Old man Hao relies on Huan to live. It seemed that Xiaohuaji really didn't want to part with this ugly animal. His words were a little incoherent, but his heart couldn't stand Zhang Xiaohua. At the last moment, he was a little ruthless and made a decision. However, ordinary people would think that the previous refusal was just for the sake of the final increase in the price. After all, this animal was his, and old man Hao was just raising it for him. However, from the short contact just half a day ago, Zhang Xiaohua knew that although the scabby child in front of him loved money, he wasn't greedy. The last sentence was indeed the main point of his words, but it was indeed his heartfelt words. He would indeed give most of the money he used to buy the animal to old man Hao. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua asked again, Xiaohuaji, but Huan is yours. Why did you give the money to old man Hao? Xiaohuaji also asked strangely, Young master, although Huan is mine, I can't raise it. Old man Hao is helping me raise it. I have to give the money to old man Hao. What's so strange about this? Zhang Xiaohua blinked, touched her nose, and thought, What a good child. Old man Hao, who was next to them, became vigilant and asked, Young master, what do you want this animal for? Your family doesn't lack animals to farm, and you don't have to worry about the family's land. Why make the child unhappy? Zhang Xiaohua quickly said, Old man Hao, don't blame me. I was just joking with Xiaohuaji. What I need is a fast horse. This ugly animal isn't a horse. What do I want it for? Don't you think so, Xiaohuaji? Hearing this, Xiaohuaji said embarrassedly, Young master, are you really joking with me? Seeing Zhang Xiaohuaji nodding affirmatively, she was relieved and said with a smile, I really thought that young master liked Huan. Look at its rotten body. How can it be worthy of young master? While speaking, her eyes were a little absent-minded and flashed with guilt. She quickened her steps and led Huan forward. Not long after, the three of them arrived at the south of the city. Old man Hao's house was close to the street, but it was also shabby. The inside was even dirtier and smelled very bad. It was even worse than Ji Xiaohua's house. Zhang Xiaohua didn't care. She stood at the door and took down the sack on Huan's back. When she wanted to help with the firewood, Xiaohuaji wouldn't let her. She could only watch them, one old and one young, move the big bundle of firewood from Huan's back with difficulty. I don't know how old man Hao got the firewood on Huan's back outside the city. Zhang Xiaohuaji sighed. When Ji Xiaohuaji led Huan to the corner of the courtyard where flies were everywhere and the stench was endless, Huan wasn't as docile as usual. It stood on all fours like nails. No matter how hard Ji Xiaohuaji tried, she couldn't move it at all. Later, old man Hao also joined in. The two of them tried together, but the odd beast only shook its head left and right. Its eyes stared at Zhang Xiaohua at the door and didn't move. Zhang Xiaohua also looked at it in surprise. Just now on the street, he read Huan's emotions. Perhaps it was just a momentary illusion. At this moment, The desire and unwillingness in Huan's eyes were reflected in Zhang Xiaohua's eyes. When Ji Xiaohua saw this, she was so anxious that tears almost fell. Her small face flushed red. She mustered all her strength and pulled on Huan's reins, looking at Zhang Xiaohua how uneasily from time to time. Sigh! Zhang Xiaohua how sighed. He turned around, picked up the sack, and left the courtyard. After a while, the light in Huan's eyes disappeared. Her eyes dimmed again, and she closed them again, revealing a slight gap. She moved her feet slowly. Under Ji Xiaohua's command, she walked to the dark corner and stopped moving. She let the flies crawl all over her body. The donkey-like tail behind her was too lazy to move, let alone the swill in front of her that was already rotten. No matter what, she couldn't open her mouth. Ji Xiaohua clearly saw that in the corner of Huan's eyes, there was a sparkling and translucent teardrop. -3. Chapter 324. Zhang Xiaohua waited outside Father Hao's door for a long time before Ji Xiaohua arrived. Ji Xiaohua looked very listless. However, when she saw Zhang Xiaohua, she still forced a smile and said, "Young master, sorry to keep you waiting for a long time." Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and said, "It's okay, it's okay." So Ji Xiaohua led Zhang Xiaohua back to Ji Xiaohua's shabby house. When they arrived at the door, Ji Xiaohua turned around and asked, "Young master, we're at my house. Do you want to go in?" Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said with a smile, "Yes, let's go in and talk." Ji Xiaohua was a little absent-minded. She pushed the door and went in without saying hello. Madame Zhang heard the movement inside and forced herself to be alert. She asked in a weak voice, "Xiaohua is back." Ji Xiaohua was a little flustered and hurriedly responded, "Mother, it's me. I'm back." Madame Zhang coughed for a while and scolded, "You child, you didn't say anything when you entered the house. That young master has already left. Later you and mother will go to Father Hao and let him talk to you again. The young master only gave you 10 or so coins, which can't be compared to the long-term income of the tea shed. You'd better go to the owner of the tea shed and admit your mistake. You can be beaten and punished, and then boil water for him. That... Mother, the young master hasn't left yet." With that, Ji Xiaohua looked at Zhang Xiaohua apologetically and walked into the shabby house. "What? He hasn't left yet and you're back? Did you do something wrong again?" Ji Xiaohua's little face was a little red and said, "Mother, I didn't do anything wrong. The young master insisted on coming to our house. Hey, the young master is here again. Why didn't you say so earlier? Xiaohua, come and help mother up." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she wanted to stop him, but after thinking for a moment, she stood there with a smile and didn't move. At this time, she heard Ji Xiaohua's voice inside the room. "Oh, mother, why haven't you eaten the buns from this morning? It's already noon, you must be starving. I'll heat it up for you now." Then there was a burst of coughing, and then a gentle voice said, "Xiaohua, you must be hungry. Go and heat up the buns. You can eat them. Nyangqin just drank last night's corn. I'm not hungry at all. Mother, that rice stubble has been there for several days. It has a rancid smell. Didn't you say that you would throw it away today? That's why you didn't let me eat it." "It's okay. Nyangqin originally wanted to throw it away, but after smelling it, it was still edible. That's why I casually ate it. It can resist hunger and thirst. Xiaohua hasn't eaten buns for a long time, so eat a little more. Nyangqin's body is the same, but you're different. You're growing." The mother and son's voices weren't loud, but Zhang Xiaohua heard everything clearly. She was moved, and carefully tasted the affection of licking her child. In this world, the mother's love for her son was really the same. She couldn't help but think of her distant mother. Inside the room, Xiaohua said again, "Nyangqin, try it. This is a snack from Tasting Tea Pavilion. The young master ate it at noon. I brought back the rest. Nyangqin doesn't want to eat. You eat it. Nyangqin ate it when she was young. It's a pity that you haven't eaten it yet. I ate at noon. Nyangqin, The young master didn't eat a bite at noon. I ate it all. Nyangqin, quickly eat a bite. After saying that, Xiaohua took out a piece from the neatly wrapped handkerchief and put it in front of her mother's mouth. Mrs. Zhang shook her head and said, Xiaohua, you eat it. Otherwise, you can eat it at night. Nyangqin doesn't feel well and doesn't want to eat it. Xiaohua was a little angry, so she said, Nyangqin, I know you can eat, but you want me to eat more. However, I'm already 9 years old. I'm no longer a child. Don't lie to me. If you don't eat, I won't eat. Seeing Xiaohua like this, Mrs. Zhang's tears almost fell. She forced a smile and said, Okay, Xiaohua, good girl. Nyangqin will eat a bite, okay? Xiaohua, good girl. Inside the room, Ji Xiaohua didn't feel much, but outside the room, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was touched. When she was young, didn't her grandmother call her like this? For a moment, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes were blurred. Her homesickness became stronger. She wished she had wings on her back. With just one flap, she could return to the Guozhuang house and plant new soil for her grandmother's lonely small grave. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua coughed a little in the courtyard and said, Auntie, can you come out for a moment and talk in the courtyard? When Mrs. Zhang heard this, she hurriedly said, Young master, please wait a moment. This lowly concubine will go out immediately. Young master has been waiting in the courtyard for a long time. Xiaohua also whispered, Nyangqin, I forgot that young master was in the courtyard. Mrs. Zhang sighed and said, Xiaohua, you are still young. Did you offend young master in the morning? Quickly, help Nyangqin out. How could that be? Nyangqin, there is no such thing. Xiaohua felt very wronged. You are just a child. If you didn't offend him, would young master come here? Mrs. Zhang didn't believe Xiaohua. As soon as they went out, Mrs. Zhang apologized. Young master, did Xiaohua offend young master in the morning? Or did she do something wrong? This lowly concubine will apologize on her behalf. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly returned the courtesy and said, Auntie is too polite. I really didn't. Xiaohua is a good child. I am very satisfied with her. I came here to say goodbye to you. I also have something to tell you. Mrs. Zhang felt strange, but she still politely asked, Young master, you don't have to be polite. If this lowly concubine or Xiaohua can help, we will definitely help. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a while, organized her words, and then said, It's like this, Auntie. Xiaohua helped me a lot in the morning. He was very considerate. It was far beyond my imagination. Originally, I told him that I will give him 11 copper coins, but I suddenly changed my mind. When Mrs. Zhang heard this, she was somewhat puzzled. She thought, It's fine if you don't want to give money. But why did you say that my son did a good job? But if you want to give more, you should give him some tips. I really don't understand. She saluted again and said, Young master is too polite. If Xiaohua didn't take care of him well, you shouldn't give him any copper coins. Besides, you gave him steamed buns and snacks at noon. It's more than enough to pay for his salary. Zhang Xiaohua wrinkled her nose and said, Auntie, you misunderstood. I just want to give Xiaohua more money. Mrs. Zhang smiled and said, Young master, you don't have to. Didn't I just say that you already treat my family's Xiaohua well, so you don't need to spend too much money? Zhang Xiaohua said, Those are just casual things. I have to thank Xiaohua for what he did for me. You don't have to refuse. Mrs. Zhang smiled and said, In that case, this lowly concubine won't refuse. Xiaohua, come and thank the young master. Xiaohua stepped forward and saluted Zhang Xiaohua. Thank you, young master. Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, You don't have to be too polite. Xiaohua, I'm very satisfied with what you did this morning. You wrote the route in detail. How can I let you pay for those copper coins? When Xiaohua heard this, her face became a little hot. Zhang Xiaohua continued to say, Your mother's health isn't good, so you have to take care of her at home. That's right, it's best to let the doctor in the medical hall diagnose your mother. If she's always like this, how can her body withstand it? When Mrs. Zhang and Xiaohua heard this, they both smiled bitterly. Then Zhang Xiaohua threw the huge sack in her hand in the courtyard with a pun sound. She took out the small bag of silver coins that she just exchanged and handed it over. She said, "Auntie, this is what I want to give to Xiaohua. You can take it." Ah! Mrs. Zhang and Xiaohua were dumbfounded. Zhang Xiaohua looked at them and explained, "I originally wanted to give Xiaohua banknotes, but I thought that it would be suspicious for a child to take out banknotes. Moreover, if you have ingots of silver at home, wouldn't it be easy to attract trouble? That's why I went to the bank with Xiaohua and exchanged them for copper coins. There are 10 strings of coins in this sack and 5 taels of silver coins in this small cloth bag." Oh, when we were exchanging, Xiaohua was also present. He knows that these small taels of silver won't bring you any trouble. That's right. Based on Zhang Xiaohua's experience in Lu Town and Pingyang City, there were bound to be sinister people in this world. If Ji Xiaohua and Madame Zhang went out with 5 taels of silver, they would probably be targeted by some bullies or scoundrels before they could spend it. She was kind enough to help them, but she did not want to bring disaster to them for no reason. "Young master, you went to the bank to exchange copper coins for me?" Xiaohua looked at the unfamiliar young master in front of her in disbelief. She did not even know his name. "Yes, do you think that I have nothing better to do and exchange copper coins for fun? This thing is very heavy. It's 10,000 copper coins and you didn't even help me carry it," Zhang Xiaohua said jokingly. "Young master." Xiaohua did not know what to say. "No. Young master, we can't accept this money." When Mrs. Zhang saw this, she did not hesitate and said resolutely, "I still want to bring Xiaohua with me. Please don't be like this." Zhang Xiaohua knew that Mrs. Zhang had misunderstood and smiled. "Auntie, you misunderstand. I have no intention of bringing Xiaohua with me. He also knows that my home is not here and I still have a long way to go. Moreover, to be honest, I'm not some rich young master and don't need anyone to serve me. So don't worry, Xiaohua will still be by your side. But young master, you are so kind to us. Why are you doing this for us?" Mrs. Zhang really did not understand. If it was an older person, she could understand that it was because he coveted her beauty. Not to mention that her appearance was not outstanding, this young master was still too young. If he wanted to buy her child was not worth so much money. She didn't want to take the money, but the poor had no ambition. She deeply understood the difficulties of a poor family. It was one thing for her to suffer, but she had to watch her child go out before dawn every day and come back late at night. Her child was bullied in other people's tea shed. Although he didn't say anything, she still heard his cries at night and felt pain in her heart. -3. Chapter 325. But now, right in front of her, someone suddenly threw out so much money for no reason. He only said that he would give it to them without asking for anything in return. How could she refuse? In fact, even if this person had some ulterior motives, she would still consider it carefully. But the young man in front of her actually said that this was a free lunch. Madame Zhang felt like she was hit in the head by a pie in the sky. And she felt dizzy. She tried her best to stop coughing and stared straight at the young man who was taller than her by a head. She stared at his pure eyes. After a long while, she felt a little disappointed. Those pure eyes were like the white blue sky. And even clearer than the blue sky. In that purity, she could see the hot blood in the young man's heart. This time, Madame Zhang really believed that this young man didn't ask for anything in return. She just somewhat believed. Xiaohua, who was next to him, excitedly confirmed again. "Young master, you really want to give all this money to this little one? Really?" Zhang Xiaohua turned his head to look at the young man with the scabby head and said with a smile, "Of course, it's true. When you came to the tea house to eat snacks, I had already decided." When Xiaohua heard this, he jumped up in an instant and cried, "Young master, I'm sorry, I was wrong, I misunderstood you. Wait, really wait." After that, he shook off his mother's hand and rushed out of the yard. "Xiaohua!" Madame Zhang shouted loudly. She didn't know what her son did wrong and what he was going to do. Zhang Xiaohua was also surprised at first, but after all, he had his divine sense. After a slight sweep, the corner of his mouth showed a trace of a smile. Seeing her son run out, Madame Zhang coughed for a while and asked, "Young master, there is no free lunch in this world. Do you really want to give us so much money for no reason?" Zhang Xiaohua sighed and said, "I know that you won't believe me no matter what I say. Even if it's me, if someone suddenly gives me so much money for no reason, I will also hesitate. Perhaps only a few years ago, when I still haven't walked out of the farmland, I will foolishly believe in such a good thing. Young master, why don't you tell me, maybe I will believe you?" After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua said, "Actually, it's very simple. I'm not the young master of a rich family like you think. I'm the same as you. Oh, I'm a bit worse than you. You live in the city, my home is in the countryside. As for me, I haven't seen my mother for several years. Seeing Xiaohua Ji has such a good relationship with you, it reminds me of my mother. If I were Xiaohua, of course, I would be happy." Madame Zhang listened thoughtfully. Zhang Xiaohua continued, "In addition, Xiaohua Ji really helped me a lot. He may not know it himself, but he really helped me a lot. I really don't know how to express my gratitude. If I have any panacea, I will not hesitate to let you take it, but I don't. I only have some money, but I really don't dare to give you more money, so I can only give you this little." "Ah? Just in one morning, my Xiaohua Ji helped you so much?" Madame Zhang didn't believe it. It was just a rout, how could it be worth such a big fuss? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Yes, it's really like this. If you don't accept my gratitude, it will have a great impact on me. So, and for me, you have to accept my kindness." How could Madame Zhang believe these words? She only thought that Zhang Xiaohua was making excuses. But she didn't know that these words were really true and there was no exaggeration. "Of course, there is another reason," Zhang Xiaohua was about to say, but a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "It seems that Xiaohua Ji is really a good child." While Madame Zhang was puzzled, Xiaohua Ji held Huan Huan and walked to the door. Xiaohua Ji put Huan Huan outside the door and walked in with tears on his face. When he saw Zhang Xiaohua, he was even more sad. He cried and said, "Young master, this little one didn't know that young master was so good to this little one. You treated this little one like this, but this little one still hid it from you. I really can't stand it." Zhang Xiaohua patted his shoulder and said gently, "Ji Xiaohua Ji, don't be like this. I want a horse, not a cow that can carry things. Although Huan Huan can carry things, it may not be able to carry the things I want to carry. Moreover, it can't run fast. Besides, a gentleman doesn't take what others like. You should keep Huan Huan for yourself." "No, young master, Huan Huan can run. Really, it runs very fast." "Eh? Really?" Zhang Xiaohua looked at Huan Huan, who had just been washed outside the courtyard, and didn't dare to believe it. "Yes, last year, Huan Huan and I met a wild dog outside the city. It wanted to bite me, so Huan Huan carried me back. It ran so fast that even the wild dog couldn't catch up with it. It runs really fast." Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua didn't believe it, Xiaohua Ji pulled Zhang Xiaohua and said, "Young master, if you don't believe me, you can ride it and see." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua immediately became interested. In fact, he really hoped to have something to ride on. If this David's deer could be made, it would really solve a big problem for him. Walking in front of Huan Huan, Huan Huan seemed to know Xiaohua's intention. Her eyes were wide open and she sniffed Zhang Xiaohua's scent affectionately. Zhang Xiaohua looked at Huan Huan's broad back and pressed her hands on it. Huan Huan didn't seem to feel anything. Overjoyed, Zhang Xiaohua looked at Huan Huan and smiled. "Huan Huan, I'm going to press harder. Can you do it?" Huan Huan understood Zhang Xiaohua's voice and blinked her eyes. Zhang Xiaohua laughed and pressed down hard. With Zhang Xiaohua's strength, Huan Huan's legs went soft, but she immediately stood up strong. There was a trace of unyielding and grievance in her bright eyes. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed again. He used a lot of strength this time. His arms had the strength of more than 10,000 pounds. This was beyond Zhang Xiaohua's expectation. Moreover, looking at Huan Huan's eyes, the weakness in her legs was a kind of humiliation. Thinking about it, how could he be treated well in Father Hao's house? It was good enough to be able to eat the rancid swill. Then, Zhang Xiaohua picked up the long sword in the yard and put it on Huan Huan's back. Huan Huan's back only sank a little, but her 4 legs were still standing firmly. Zhang Xiaohua kicked off and her body floated up. Huan Huan's 4 legs moved and she ran toward the street. Although she wasn't as fast as a galloping horse, her speed was still very impressive. "I've really picked up a treasure," Zhang Xiaohua muttered in her heart as she rode Huan Huan back. At the door of the small yard, Xiaohuaji, with tears on her face, and Zhang Xiaohua, with a happy expression, were waiting for Zhang Xiaohua's return. Zhang Xiaohua jumped down from Huan Huan's back and walked into the yard. He smiled and said, "Xiaohuaji, it seems that you and I are really fated. You, as an oddball, can be of great help to me." Xiaohuaji said embarrassedly, "Young master, don't praise me. In fact, when you went to buy the horse I thought of Huan Huan, but I didn't dare to believe you and couldn't bear to part with her. In the end, this little one still had selfish motives. However, young master still treats this little one so well. This little one is really sorry." Zhang Xiaohua waved his hand and said, "Don't have the heart to harm others, but don't have the heart to guard against others. This saying is right. How can I blame you? However, now that you've given me Huan Huan, you've given me another problem." Xiaohuaji asked curiously. "Why is that?" Zhang Xiaohua said, "Originally, I could repay your help by giving you some money. If you give me Huan Huan, won't I owe you a lot? But if I give you more money, won't I be causing trouble for you?" Xiaohuaji was very puzzled and said, "Young master, I don't understand. It's naturally good to have more money. How can it cause trouble? Young master, I didn't mean to ask you for money. You've already given us so much. Just take Huan Huan as a gift from me." Zhang Xiaohuaji thought for a moment, and took out 2 banknotes from his arms. He handed them to Ji Xiaohua and said, "I don't deserve a reward without any effort. I'll use these banknotes to exchange for your Huan Huan." How could Ji Xiaohuaji accept them? He repeatedly refused. Even Madame Zhang coughed, and tried her best to stop him. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohuaji was moved. He took out a banknote and said, "Since it's like this, I won't give it to you. I'll trouble you to go to the ox and horse market with this banknote, and help Father Hao buy a cow or a mule. Didn't you say that Father Hao needs Huan Huan to live? If I take Huan Huan away, how will Father Hao live?" This. Xiaohuaji was a little hesitant. At that time, he only felt guilty and didn't think too much. Now that Zhang Xiaohuaji mentioned it, it was really a problem. However, he looked at the big sack on the ground and said, "Young master, didn't you already give so much money? It's enough to buy animals." Zhang Xiaohuaji shook his head and said, "That's for you. If you use these copper coins to buy a mule, you won't be able to carry it. You can find a place to put the copper coins and use them for daily use. I pawned these banknotes. You can directly buy a mule and say that you exchanged it with Huan Huan. I think there won't be any problems." Xiaohuaji still looked at his mother, who was coughing nonstop. Madame Zhang sighed and said, "Young master gave too much." Zhang Xiaohuaji said with a smile, "If you don't accept the banknotes, I don't want Huan Huan." Seeing his mother's tacit agreement, Xiaohuaji still raised his hand to take it. Then Zhang Xiaohuaji said, "Auntie, is there a spare room in the house?" Madame Zhang was stunned. She pointed to a shabby shed next to them and said, "Young master, is that okay? It's a stove used for cooking." Zhang Xiaohuaji said with a smile, "Okay, wait a moment." After saying that, Zhang Xiaohua quickly walked into the courtyard, leaving Ji Xiaohua and his wife standing in the middle of the courtyard with a puzzled look on their faces. -3. Chapter 326. After a while, Zhang Xiaohua came out from inside. Her face was slightly pale. She held a small piece of white jade in her hand and handed it to Ji Xiaohua. She said, Ji Xiaohua, this is your reward for giving me Huan Huan. Oh, don't refuse first. You must accept this. Just now, I told your mother that I don't have any panacea that can cure your mother's illness, but I suddenly remembered that I have an old piece of jade that can cure illness. Then she said to Madame Zhang, This jade is not valuable, but it is very good for the human body. If you can wear it every day, and with the doctor's treatment, it will be better day by day. Hearing this, Ji Xiaohua's eyes could no longer leave the jade in Zhang Xiaohua's hand. Being able to cure his mother's illness was his biggest wish. Since the young master in front of her could take out this thing, there must be a reason. He wouldn't deceive her for no reason. As for Madame Zhang, she looked at the jade and then looked at her son. Unconsciously, she didn't have the courage to refuse. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua stuffed the jade into Ji Xiaohua's hand and said with a smile, In that case, I won't stay any longer. I hope that auntie will recover soon. Then she turned to leave. Madame Zhang shouted, Young master, what is the reason that you didn't say just now? Ji Xiaohua also shouted, Yes, young master. People say that people don't wake up early if there is no benefit. This little one also doesn't have a beautiful older sister or younger sister. Why are you so good to me? Ha! Zhang Xiaohua laughed and floated up. Her figure flew over the low wall of Ji Xiaohua's house and landed on Huan Huan's back outside the door. Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged and urged the four odd beasts. When Ji Xiaohua and her mother arrived at the door, they heard Zhang Xiaohua's voice from a distance. The reason is very simple. Because I am also called Xiaohua. However, I am called Zhang Xiaohua. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's figure gradually disappear, Ji Xiaohua's heart actually had a desire to chase after her. However, hearing her mother's heart-wrenching coughs, how could he take a step forward? It wasn't that he didn't think that Zhang Xiaohua was an unusual person. He knew that the long sword that was too heavy to lift was extraordinary. Now, he actually saw him fly over the wall like a bird. He knew that he was more magical than he thought. Pingyang City, Lu Town, Huanqi Manor, Zhang Xiaohua. Ji Xiaohua muttered and memorized the route map he gave Zhang Xiaohua in her mind. Then, she turned around and supported her mother. Mother, you should go back to the house. The wind is strong outside. After entering the courtyard, she took out the jade and handed it to her mother. Mother, you should go back to the house and find a string to string it with you. Young master, yes, young master Zhang said that it is useful, so it must be useful. Madame Zhang had seen Zhang Xiaohua's qigong before, so she naturally believed in Zhang Xiaohua's words. She reached out to take the money, but their gazes immediately fell on the large pile of copper coins in the courtyard. With Ji Xiaohua, a 9-year-old child, and Madame Zhang's body that had been ill for a long time, it was extremely tiring to move these 10,000 coins into the house and hide them in a secret place. However, doing this kind of work was tiring but happy. Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged on Huan Huan's back. Huan Huan was so happy that it could jump up and walk quickly along the main street of Songning Town, heading out of the city. Huan Huan walked very steadily. Zhang Xiaohua didn't feel any bumps at all on its back. Huan Huan walked very quickly, not much slower than an ordinary horse. However, the people on the street were all pointing fingers at Zhang Xiaohua. That was because Huan Huan, which didn't look like anything, carried a large pile of firewood back from outside the city every day. Many people had seen it with their own eyes. Huan Huan's stinky body and strange appearance were obvious to all. Now, there was a young person sitting on it, and Huan Huan was running quite happily. How could people not be surprised? There were even people who covered their mouths and sneered. However, this is also good. So many people saw me ride Huan Huan out of the city. When old man Hao or Xiaohua go to buy a mule or a cow, it'll be a good excuse. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua was still thinking about the safety of Ji Xiaohua and the others. It had to be said that Zhang Xiaohua had indeed matured and grown up. She was worthy of his tall and thin stature. Zhang Xiaohua had already memorized the route on the white cloth that Ji Xiaohua gave him. When they arrived at the city gate, he got off the odd duck. After asking the passers-by carefully, he sat on the odd duck again and patted Huan Huan's head. The odd duck immediately galloped away, leaving behind many people at the city gate who were pointing and gesticulating. On the spacious road, there were few pedestrians, but Huan Huan ran very happily. Its eyes were full of excitement, and its 4 hoof-like feet kept exerting force. It seemed that this kind of galloping days was the life it wanted. However, after a long while, Huan Huan's speed didn't slow down, but there were some slight beads of sweat on its neck. Zhang Xiaohua was very considerate, and noticed it. He patted its head slowly with his hand. Huan Huan really understood his meaning and slowed down its pace, moving forward leisurely. This Huan Huan is really a strange creature. No, what kind of animal is this odd duck? Not only can it carry thousands of kilograms of things, but its speed is also not much slower than a horse. The most rare thing is that Huan Huan seems to understand my intentions. I don't need to speak. As long as I pat its head, it immediately knows my thoughts. Can such an animal still be called an animal? Even if it's called a spiritual beast, it's still worthy. It's just that this spiritual beast has been spoiled by Old Man Hao. It only knows how to carry firewood all day long. What it eats is even worse than a pig's. God has pity on it. It's really a pearl covered in dust. If I didn't happen to meet it, wouldn't Huan Huan die of old age in the pigsty? Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but stroke the back of Huan Huan's neck. Huan Huan seemed to understand Zhang Xiaohua's meaning. It let out a long howl that split the sky, full of joy. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Let's go, Huan Huan. I'll call you Huan Huan in the future. If you follow me, I won't treat you unfairly. Oh, I forgot to ask Xiaohua what to feed you. You haven't eaten properly for many years, so I have to take good care of you. Otherwise, you'll collapse from exhaustion before we reach the Guizhuang house. That would be very bad." Huan Huan was also happy to hear this. It growled in a low voice, but it didn't know what it wanted to express. Its feet didn't stop and it worked even harder. Presumably, it was also looking forward to the delicious fodder in a while. Although Huan Huan hadn't run for a long time and its physical strength was limited, they reached the western outskirts of Songning town by the time the sky turned dark. There were very few people. The forest by the roadside and the distant hills all revealed a kind of silence. The time for all living things to rest was coming. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua was somewhat regretful. It didn't matter to her. She had already abstained from eating, so it didn't matter whether she ate or not. However, she didn't know if Huan Huan could persist. She wanted to be free and unrestrained, so she just patted her butt and left, leaving behind the admiring stars of others. But now, she was in the middle of nowhere, so it wouldn't be too late to stay in town and leave tomorrow morning. However, at the thought of her mother who was far away, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was burning. How could she be willing to stay in this unfamiliar place for a moment longer? Just as she was thinking, she heard the crisp sound of a bell from the turning mountain on the quiet main road. Then, there was the noisy sound of horse hooves and a few people talking loudly. "Old Man Su, don't tell me you've made a mistake. We've been waiting at the intersection for a whole day. If that kid didn't leave earlier than us or stayed in town, it's also possible that he didn't fall for your trick and left by the side road." A voice that Zhang Xiaohua was familiar with sounded. "That's impossible. That kid walked when he was young. If he went to Pingyang City, he would definitely buy a horse. I came straight to you after coming out of the tea shed. I've been waiting here since early morning. How could I let him leave in advance? It's also impossible to leave by the side road. When I passed by the pub, I asked the bystanders and they said that this is the way to Pingyang City. It's almost the same as what I said. However, the road that I gave him in the end was to head north, and the correct route was to head south. But this fork in the road is still the same. From what Old Man Su said, he must still be resting in one of the inns in town. Xiao Jing, when we reach the town, go and find out where this young master is hiding. We'll go and get him out tonight. First, we'll take the banknotes from him, then we'll chop him clean and throw him into the sea." "Oh yes, Old Man Su, are your eyes playing tricks on you? Is this really a rich young master?" Of course. Don't you trust my judgment? Just based on the retro robe that he's wearing, it's estimated that it's worth dozens of silver taels. Those few people spoke very loudly and didn't have any intention to care about others. The few horses turned and rushed towards Zhang Xiaohua. Those few people were also stunned when they saw Zhang Xiaohua. They didn't expect that there would still be people walking on this road at this time. Unknowingly, they stopped talking and only the clack 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 of the horses' hooves could be heard. From their words, Zhang Xiaohua already knew their intentions. She even used her divine perception to clearly see that it was old man Su from the tea stall. But it was dusk at this time. With the alternating light and dark, ordinary people wouldn't be able to see clearly. Moreover, Zhang Xiaohua had already changed her clothes. That old man Su was still thinking about Zhang Xiaohua's retro black robe and naturally didn't recognize him immediately. It was just that when they neared, someone couldn't help but ask in surprise, "Eh? Isn't this old man Hao's broken donkey from the south of the city? Why is it being ridden out by this person? Can this donkey be ridden? It's usually used to carry firewood." At this time, old man Su also saw Zhang Xiaohua's mocking expression. He was stunned and thought in his heart, "Why does this young man look so familiar?" Immediately he laughed and said, "Ha ha ha, there's a road to heaven but you can't, there's no door to hell but you still bump into it. Brothers, this is the rich young man I was talking about." The leader of the villainous men also laughed and said, "No wonder, so he changed his clothes. He must have known that old man Su was lying." While they were talking, the other two had also surrounded Zhang Xiaohua from the side. Zhang Xiaohua was completely surrounded in the middle. Qidian Chinese website welcomes all readers to read. The latest, fastest, and hottest serial works are all at Qidian Originals. -3. Chapter 327. Looking at the four people surrounding her, Zhang Xiaohua didn't seem to panic. She was still sitting cross-legged on the back of the David's deer. The four people looked at each other and pulled out their padao from their waist. Old Su grinned and said, "This young master, seeing that your skin is so soft and tender, I won't torture you any more. Quickly obediently hand over all the banknotes on your body, then I will give you a quick death. Otherwise I will slice off all the flesh on your body." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "This hero, I heard that the heroes of the underworld rob money and don't kill people. If I give you all the money on my body, will you spare my life?" Old Su didn't speak, but the evil man next to him laughed and said, "Could it be that this guy's brain is damaged from reading too much? We have been roaming around here for many years, and we don't leave anyone alive. If we only let you go, when the government comes to arrest us tomorrow, who will we find to reason with?" The two people behind him also said, "A few days ago, there was also a scholar who talked to us about benevolence, righteousness, and morality. He also advised us to turn over a new leaf. But when we cut off his finger, he kept calling us grandpa and begged us to let him go. Boy, don't tell me you also don't want to be tactless? Hurry up, before the sky is completely dark, let me give you a quick death. I can also find a place to bury you and let you have a place to rest." Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua was still calm and collected, the evil man said, "Xiao Jing, you go and help this young master on his way. We are in a hurry. Most likely, the banknotes are on his body. We will find them in a while." The people behind Zhang Xiaohua raised their padao and chopped over without hesitation. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua didn't move. He only took out an item from his bosom. It was hard to see clearly in the darkness. Moreover, the item disappeared as soon as it was taken out. Then Xiao Jing, who had raised his saber to hack at Zhang Xiaohua, fell to the ground with a putong sound. The padao also fell to the ground with a clang sound. The evil man and old Su were on the other side, so they couldn't see clearly. However, the person next to Xiao Jing clearly saw a black light fly from Zhang Xiaohua's side and hit Xiao Jing's throat. Xiao Jing immediately fell off his horse, and the black light shot towards him like lightning. The evil man was shocked and said, "What kind of sorcery is this?" Before he finished speaking, the black light was already in front of his eyes. He didn't have time to dodge and immediately fell to the ground. Seeing the two people opposite them fall from their horses, how could the evil man and old Su not know that they met a tough opponent? They immediately turned their horses around and didn't care about each other. They patted their horses and left. Zhang Xiaohua laughed at the back and said, "Since you came, why leave?" She pointed her finger. The black light changed direction and stabbed at the evil man's throat. It was the small sword in his hand. Using an immortal's flying sword to kill a bandit was really using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. The evil man didn't resist at all and immediately fell from his horse. But this delay allowed old Su to run far away. The David's deer couldn't hear Zhang Xiaohua's signal. It had already swung its hooves and directly chased after them. Unexpectedly, it wasn't the slightest bit slower than the fierce horse. Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said, "You are really anxious. Dealing with this kind of person, are you afraid that he will run away? It's just that, since it's convenient, you can run away." Hearing this, Huan ran even faster. Not long after, it had already caught up. Zhang Xiaohua sat steadily on the back of the David's deer and said slowly, "Old Su, you have killed so many people. Don't tell me you are not afraid of retribution?" How could old Su dare to slow down his horse? While running, he begged for mercy. "Young master, I have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. Today, please spare my life. I will immediately put down my butcher's knife and become a Buddha. Tomorrow, I will accumulate virtue and do good deeds. I will be a good person. What do you think?" Zhang Xiaohua said. "When you killed people, did you think about today? When you wanted to kill me just now, did you think about today? Heaven is watching. It's not that you won't get retribution, it's just that the time has not come. When the time comes, you will definitely get retribution." After saying this, Zhang Xiaohua patted the head of the David's deer again. Huan ran even faster. It had already passed old Su and went forward. Old Su was overjoyed. He immediately pulled the reins of the horse and slowly moved away from Zhang Xiaohua. He cupped his fists and said, "Many thanks to the hero for letting me go. I will go back. Tomorrow, I will open the barn to provide food to the poor." In his heart he thought, "This person is really strange. Do you think this is a horse race? Once I stop, you will overtake me." Who knew that Zhang Xiaohua's leisurely words came from the front? "You bastard, when did I say I will let you go? If I let you go, what will the scholar who was tortured to death by you 2 days ago think? What will the people who were killed by you all think? I have already said that it's not that you won't get retribution, it's just that the time has not come. Today is the day you will be beheaded." When old Su heard this, he did not care about anything else. He turned his horse around and ran back. Seeing that he was about to reach the foot of the mountain, he was overjoyed. Suddenly, he saw a black light rushing towards his throat. Before he could react, he felt a chill in his throat. His vision turned black and he immediately lost consciousness. Just like the 3 people before him, he fell into the dust. However, he was even more miserable. When his body fell, his feet were still in the stirrups. The horse was still running until it reached the city gate. Who knew how many sins old Su had committed? How could he still have a human form? At that time, Zhang Xiaohua naturally did not know about this. He just sat on the back of the David's deer and muttered in a low voice, "This group of people is really hateful. They don't have any manners. I just said a few words and they want to fight. This young master still wants to make them take out the banknotes in their arms first." And Zhang Xiaohua, this guy, actually became addicted to being a young master. He even changed the way he addressed himself as this young master. The corpses of the 4 people were all discovered the next day. Seeing that the 4 people were killed with a single sword strike, the officials knew that it was a vendetta in the Jianghu. After a little investigation, they discovered that these 4 ordinary people who usually did not show themselves in Songning Town were actually the murderers of many murders. This set off a huge wave in Songning Town and strengthened the government's determination to clean up. In one fell swoop, several underground forces in Songning Town were swept clean. This was not to say that this was not Zhang Xiaohua's good karma. And Ji Xiaohua, who knew the truth of this matter, worshipped this young man who had the same name as him as a god. Zhang Xiaohua walked along the road. They had just left Songning town, and there was no inn by the side of the road. After a long journey, Zhang Xiaohua felt that Huan was tired and wanted to rest. He knew that he would definitely fall asleep at midnight. And Huan had just gotten rid of the life that did not belong to it. Its body was far from being adjusted. If he forced himself to continue on the road, he would definitely kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. Seeing a mountain forest in front of him, Zhang Xiaohua made up his mind. The mountain was not high, but the trees were abnormally lush. With a sweep of his spiritual sense, he had already chosen a tree with an extremely strong crown. Patting Huan's head, he leaped up and flew to an extremely high place. He sat down cross-legged and took out a primordial stone, quietly circulating his energy to absorb primordial qi. Huan, on the other hand, let out a low hiss, extremely dissatisfied. "If you want to rest, why don't you take the sword down too? Aren't you afraid that it will tire me out if you leave it on my back?" Then, he shrugged his back and the sword fell to the ground with a clang. Afterwards, Huan slowly walked in the mountain forest in search of food. It was late at night when she came back. Zhang Xiaohua, who usually cultivated quietly on the tree crown, sniffed and lay down under the tree. In the next few days, Zhang Xiaohua and Huan traveled in the morning and slept in the night. They ate and drank when they were hungry. Oh, wrong, only Huan ate and drank when she was thirsty. When Zhang Xiaohua saw inns, tea sheds, and the like, he only asked the waiter to serve Huan well while he only had a cup of water. Huan did not seem to be very interested in fodder and other things, but she had to force herself to eat. Zhang Xiaohua saw this and remembered it in his heart. He only needed to wait for the right fodder for Huan in the future. Huan's back was very stable and not bumpy at all. It was really different from before. Huan could even adjust its speed according to the situation on the road, so Zhang Xiaohua did not have to worry about it at all. Later on, Zhang Xiaohua no longer cared about it. He only gave Huan some pointers when there was a fork in the road. The rest of the time, he took out 2 primordial stones from his pocket and cultivated with all his might. Zhang Xiaohua knew very well that there were too many unknowns in this world. The unknown things in the magma under the deserted island and the Juji realm in the direction of his cultivation were all great challenges for him. If he only focused on Jianghu, it would be very difficult for him to make any progress in his cultivation. Therefore, he had already set his sights very high and seized every moment to cultivate his cultivation method. Ever since the situation in the tea house, Zhang Xiaohua's bottleneck to the 6th layer of qi refining showed signs of loosening. Although he did not make any obvious progress in the past few days of painstaking cultivation, Zhang Xiaohua knew very well that his cultivation was slowly accumulating. Once he reached a certain level, he would definitely be able to reach the peak of the early stage of qi refining in one fell swoop. As for formations and restrictions, Zhang Xiaohua had made even more obvious progress. To be honest, when he was on the Xinrong Sex ship, Zhang Xiaohua had been able to set up a defensive restriction. He believed that he had already reached a certain limit. If he wanted to make any further progress, he would have to rely on a deeper comprehension. However, in Xiaohua's house in Songning town, a thought came to him. He recalled the records in the jade slip and on a whim, he embedded a miniature formation into a jade pendant. This was not something that an early-stage qi refining cultivator like him could accomplish. However, with the help of the slowly revolving core in his dantian, he was actually able to create a jade pendant that could calm the mind. His spiritual sense and core seemed to have made some progress as well, so he seemed to have found another direction for his breakthrough. Although the jade blood refining core could refine the core and strengthen the spiritual sense, there was still a certain amount of danger involved. He could only cultivate in an extremely safe place. He spent his days on the road trying to comprehend the miniature formation and using some worn-out jade to practice. Although he had only been on the road for a few days, he had made great progress. On this day, it was already late and they were in the middle of nowhere. Zhang Xiaohua had already gotten used to it, and was preparing to find a suitable place to rest. Suddenly, he heard a voice from a concave slope ahead of him. Thief from the Misty School, where do you think you're going? -3. Chapter 328. Misty School? Slipped through the net? Thief? Although the voice was soft, Zhang Xiaohua's senses were extremely sharp at this time. Although he did not release his divine sense, almost all of the movements around him were under his control. When these few words were put together, they sounded like thunder in Zhang Xiaohua's ears. Although Zhang Xiaohua did not join the Misty School, ever since he left the Guizhuang house and entered Pingyang City, everything about him was closely related to the Misty School. Even the immortal skills he had were obtained from the library of the Misty School. It was impossible for him not to have deep feelings for the Misty School. At this moment, someone actually dared to call a disciple of the Misty School a thief in front of him. How could he tolerate this? Moreover, the word slipped through the net piqued his curiosity even more. He didn't make any movements. Instead, his figure drifted down from the back of the David's deer. Then, he straightened his body and went straight to the top of the slope. There wasn't the slightest trace of worldly affairs during the whole process. Zhang Xiaohua landed on the top of the hill and blended in perfectly with the surroundings. If not for the people beside him who saw it with their own eyes, they would not have noticed or felt that someone had just appeared on the hill. Zhang Xiaohua crouched on the hill and quietly poked his head out. On the other side of the hill, there was a large open space. There were 3 people dressed in martial arts attire, holding swords and padao. They surrounded a young man of about 24 or 25 years old. The young man was holding a long sword and the tip of the sword was trembling slightly. His brocade robe was already in tatters and flesh could be seen in many places, revealing blood-red wounds. The clothes around the wounds were also stained with blood. The young man was already at his limit under the siege of the 3 people, but he still did not give in. At this moment, the 3 people seemed to be interrogating him for something before they could take a break. One of them laughed and said, "Misty Schoolboy, we've been following you for so long. We didn't expect you to see through us." "Hee, you're not going to run anymore?" That person didn't answer. He only took the time to adjust his breathing and recover the internal energy he had expended. Another person sneered. "Don't waste your time. Do you think we can't tell what you're doing? Even if you have full inner strength, how can you be a match for us brothers?" The last person continued. "It's better to let him rest. In a while, he can use ethereal steps to escape from our hands and back to their nest." "Hee, that's perfect. We're following behind him. Isn't it because we want to know where his lair is?" Hearing their words, Zhang Xiaohua's frown deepened. "What's going on?" At this time, the young man from the Misty School seemed to have seen the situation clearly. He stopped adjusting his breath and lowered the tip of his sword. He smiled and said, "The rumors in Jianghu say that the Alliance of the Righteous Path is named after the Righteous Path. Presumably, they all say that they do things righteously and reasonably. Unlike today, they are outnumbered and have no sense of shame." "Rumors in Jianghu?" When the 3 heard this, they laughed and said, "Are you blind? How can you believe the rumors in Jianghu? Moreover, Jianghu has always respected strength. If your Misty School's strength was strong enough, the rumors in Jianghu would naturally revolve around your Misty School. How can you let others have something on you and let us destroy your entire school?" Buzz! Zhang Xiaohua's head was about to explode when he heard the sound. "Destroy the school? Don't tell me the entire Misty School was destroyed by others? Then what happened to second brother?" In an instant, Zhang Xiaohua thought of his second brother, Zhang Xiaohu. He was about to straighten his body and go down to ask about it. But his mind changed. The Misty School's destruction wasn't something that happened today. What's the use of being anxious now? It's better to wait and see. Sure enough, the disciple of the Misty School sorrowfully said, "If you want to condemn someone, you can always find a pretext. You've been drooling over my Misty School for a long time. You're just looking for an excuse to annex it. What martial arts secret manual? It's all a lie you made up. Hee hee, whether or not there are martial arts secret manuals is not something small people like us can know. In any case, your Misty School's destruction is an indisputable fact. Sigh, as expected of a school with an inheritance. Even when surrounded by us, you still managed to escape from Misty Mountain Villa. Brother, how have you been these 3 years of hiding your name and changing your surname? Why don't you obediently come with us to the Righteous Alliance? From then on, you can walk openly in Jianghu. We brothers will use our lives to guarantee that you'll definitely have a considerable position in the Righteous Alliance. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua was even more shocked. The Misty School has already been destroyed for 3 years. Isn't that the same time I was on the deserted island? I don't know if second brother also escaped like this person. And in a moment I'll save him and ask him. Thinking this, he gently took out the small sword from his bosom and used his divine sense to control it in the air, waiting for an opportunity. That Misty School disciple smiled and said, I don't know what position you 3 brothers have in the Righteous Alliance. This? One of them hesitated and said, We're all disciples of the Golden Hall under the Righteous Alliance's 6th Alliance Master. If you're willing to come with us, we'll definitely report it to the Hall Master and record it as a great merit. That Misty School disciple thought for a moment and said, It's not that I don't believe you 3 brothers, but your positions seem to be low. How can you guarantee that your little brother's life won't be in danger? You. One of them was somewhat angry, while the other smiled and said, Little brother, you don't know. Our several sects have a secret agreement. As long as you're a disciple of the sect, as long as you're a survivor of the Misty School, oh, of course, if little brother has the intention to abandon the dark and join the light, then naturally I'm not talking about you. As long as you're willing to join any sect, then you can keep your life. If you can provide the whereabouts of others, then according to how many survivors you capture, you'll be rewarded. That's why my brother is so generous as to agree with you. Oh, so that's how it is. See, you guys really put in a lot of effort. Little brother, since we've already spoken to this point, you can see that it's already late. Why don't you put down your sword and let us seal your acupoints and return to the hall with us? That way you'll be able to make a great merit for our sect. Ai, fine. Since I've already fallen to this point, a fine bird chooses a tree to nest in. I have no choice but to make a decision. Finished speaking, that person turned the sword hilt and handed it over. That person in front of him smiled and said, Little brother is really smart. If you've already done this, then why did you let us chase you for so many days? Finished speaking, he stretched out his hand to take the sword hilt. Seeing this scene, Zhang Xiaohua was a bit surprised. This Misty School disciple was able to escape for so many days. He must be a person with a strong will. How could he give up so easily? Sure enough, before Zhang Xiaohua finished thinking, she saw a change in the situation. That disciple's hand that was holding the sword tip suddenly gripped it. His entire hand was covered in blood. That disciple did not seem to know pain as he held the sword and chopped down at that person's arm. At such a close distance, that person could not react. His face changed greatly. Seeing that his arm was about to be cut off, at that moment, a sword suddenly appeared from the side and blocked that person's arm. Dang. Sound was heard as that Misty School disciple's sword was blocked. That disciple felt pain in his hand and lost his grip on the sword, causing the sword hilt to turn around. The Misty School disciple stretched out his left hand to grab the sword hilt as if he did not care about the blood flowing from his right hand. The Righteous Alliance disciple who used his sword to block the attack laughed and said, Good brat, I knew there was something fishy going on. After being chased by us for so many days, how could he just surrender like that? That disciple who almost had his arm cut off gritted his teeth and fiercely said, Senior brother, don't talk nonsense. As long as we keep him alive, what can't we get out of him? Even if we can't get anything out of him, that's because of the other people's ability. As long as we take him down, it will be a great merit. The other two also laughed and said, Junior brother is right. That Misty School disciple saw that there was no turning back and did not reply. Holding the sword in his left hand, he thrust it forward. the three people from the Righteous Alliance were already prepared. How could they let him have the chance? Both the sword and saber arrived. In just a few moves, that disciple's body had a few more wounds. If it was not for the fact that they wanted to capture him alive, he would have already died. Seeing this, that Misty School disciple swung the sword in his left hand and used a night battle in 8 directions to force the three people back. Then, looking at the night sky, he bitterly smiled and said, "Leader O, this little one is a disciple of the Misty School in this life. I hope to be your subordinate in the next life." Saying this, he pulled the sword in his left hand back and was about to cut his own throat. Seeing this, the three people surrounding him were shocked. They hurriedly went up to stop him. But how could it be too late? At this moment of crisis, they saw an object coming from afar. A black light flashed and hit the sword in the Misty School disciple's hand. But with a "kacha" sound, that sword was actually broken into 2. Then, that object did not slow down and stabbed into the ground. In the darkness, it seemed like a dagger. Who? The three people from the Righteous Alliance were shocked and turned around to look. They saw that not far away on a hillside, a thin figure stood up from the ground. Then, he actually used Qigong to fly on grass. Like a gust of wind, he floated down and in an instant, he was in front of everyone. At this time, everyone saw clearly that this was a slightly tall youth around 15 or 16 years old. That person entered the field and did not pay attention to the three people from the Righteous Alliance. Instead, he stared at the Misty School disciple and asked, "What did you say? What happened to the Misty School?" The ethereal sect disciple's sword was first broken by the flying dagger, and the web between his thumb and index finger on his left hand was cracked. Then, he was shocked by the young man's superb lightness skill. Most importantly, the young man was so young. Seeing him staring at him and asking questions, he did not know what to say. At this time, the three people surrounding the Misty School disciple moved slightly and expanded their encirclement. They quietly surrounded the youth. Then, one of them clasped his fist and asked, "May I know which sect this Xiaoxia is from?" "I am a disciple of the Righteous Alliance's Jin Yu Hall. I am here to handle some matters." Xiaoxia. Qidian website welcomes all readers to read. The latest, fastest, and most popular series of works are all at Qidian Originals. -3. Chapter 329. Shut up! Without waiting for that person to finish speaking, the young man shouted. That person was startled, but before he could finish his sentence, the three of them looked at each other and clenched their weapons tightly, secretly on guard. Zhang Xiaohua saw that he had frightened the Misty School's disciple, so he cupped his hands and bowed. "Senior brother, I used to work at Huanxi Mountain Villa, and my name is Zhang Xiaohua. Yes, I used to work with He Tianshu from the pharmacy hall, planting medicinal herbs. When I heard senior brother's words, I was very puzzled, so I came out." "Senior brother, please explain in detail. He Tianshu from the pharmacy hall?" The disciple frowned. There were thousands of people in the Misty School. How could he know each and every one of them? But soon after, he pondered for a moment, and said mockingly, "Yes, I don't know people like He Tianshu. There are so many people in the Misty School, you can just make up a name, and there might not be no one in the sect. Righteous methods are useless against me." After saying that, his eyes looked at the small sword stuck in the ground. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned, but immediately understood. He smiled without saying anything, and slowly walked forward. The disciple was surprised and stepped back. "What are you doing?" Zhang Xiaohua ignored him and walked straight to the small sword, bending down to pull it out. In fact, if he directly moved the sword, how could it be so laborious? He just didn't want more people to know that he cultivated the way of immortality, which would attract unnecessary trouble. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua pick up the small sword, the three people from the Righteous Alliance couldn't hold back. They had just used psychological tactics against the Misty School's disciple, but not only did they not win easily, there was also a tiger blocking their way. If they hesitated, there might be unexpected changes. In the current situation, 2 against 3, they still had the confidence to win, but after a while, that might not be the case. Although just now they were shocked by Zhang Xihua's qigong, but when they heard that this young man was only a herb grower in the Huanxi manor, and was only the subordinate of a Misty School's pharmacy hall's disciple, they couldn't help but look down on him. Thinking of this, a disciple from the Righteous Alliance sneered. "Ha ha, another survivor of the Misty School, but your weight seems to be a lot lighter, just a servant. Huanxi Manor seems to be a branch of the Misty School, so your weight is also a bit lighter. But this merit is delivered to our door, how can we brothers reject it?" After saying that, the other 2 people guarded the space behind Zhang Xiaohua and the Misty School disciple, preventing them from escaping. The other person held a long sword and stabbed towards Zhang Xiaohua's face. Zhang Xiaohua's long sword was placed on the back of the David's deer, and did not bring it along. Seeing the opponent's long sword stabbing towards her, her body swayed, using the ethereal steps to dodge the sword. At the same time, she passed the small sword to her left hand and pushed forward with her right hand, using the fist of the Big Dipper. When the Righteous Alliance disciple saw that Zhang Xiaohua was so careless, actually not using a weapon and directly facing the enemy with bare hands, he was furious in his heart, and directly slashed towards Zhang Xiaohua's right arm. Zhang Xiaohua did not panic, still using the ethereal steps to fight with him. After a few rounds, the long sword actually stained the corner of Zhang Xiaohua's clothes. Not to mention the Righteous Alliance disciple who was facing the enemy, the other 3 people were half happy and half worried. The 2 Righteous Alliance disciples were worried that the martial arts of this young man who appeared out of nowhere was actually so high. How was he a servant? He was even more powerful than the Misty School disciple just now. They were afraid that this mission would be ruined. And the Misty School disciple was happy that this young man who called himself Zhang Xiaohua was using the Misty School's ethereal steps. He had deliberately used it, wasn't it, to tell him his identity? Seeing that he could keep his life, how could he not be happy? But thinking about it carefully, this youth claimed to be a servant of Huanxi Manor. How could he have learned the ethereal steps? This was the sect's divine skill, even he had only seen it recently. Looking at this youth's skill, he had been in Misty School for more than 10 years, how could he not have heard of it? Could this be a trap set by the Righteous Alliance? Not to mention that after the Misty School's disciple thought about it, the situation on the field did not change. Zhang Xiaohua only used the Big Dipper fist and ethereal steps to tangle with the Righteous Alliance's disciple. In the past, when Zhang Xiaohua was not proficient in martial arts, she used these 2 martial arts to defeat the young experts of the Dalan Temple in the martial arts exhibition. In these few years, how could Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts progress be imagined by an ordinary person? Not to mention the ethereal steps and Big Dipper divine fist, even the ordinary Arhat fist and 6 directions fist would have a miraculous effect when used against the enemy under the effects of divine sense. This Righteous Tao Alliance disciple was far from being a match for them. Seeing that his attack had no effect, the Righteous Alliance's disciple was somewhat anxious. With a loud shout, his long sword pierced towards Zhang Xiaohua's chest. Zhang Xiaohua dodged to the side again, and the disciple's left arm also lifted up at the same time. With a so sound, an arrow was shot straight towards Zhang Xiaohua's body that was still in the air. The Misty School's disciple who was watching by the side also exclaimed in a low voice. This kind of concealed weapon that was shot in the air was the hardest to guard against. Presumably, the number of martial arts experts that were injured by this move was not small. But the next thing that happened made the 4 people present dumbstruck. They saw that Zhang Xiaohua did not make any other movements. She only stretched her right hand forward like she was picking up a flower. Very gently, she pinched the arrow between her thumb and forefinger. The blue arrowhead on the arrow could be seen clearly under the moonlight. Seeing that the arrow had failed, the Righteous Alliance's disciple shouted, "Flower pinching finger? You are from the Dalan Temple. My 2 junior brothers, quickly come and help me." The other 2 did not have the time to look at the Misty School's disciple. They each drew their swords and were about to step forward. At this time, a light laugh came from the field and said, "Since you came down to attack, then don't blame me for returning an eye for an eye." Ha! They saw that Zhang Xiaohua was like a wisp of smoke. Her figure leapt up and pounced in front of the Righteous Alliance's disciple. That disciple hurriedly held his sword horizontally, wanting to block, but that sword seemed to pierce through the void and did not seem to have any strength. Zhang Xiaohua's figure was like a ghost. She leapt up, the small sword in her left hand very naturally extended forward, then immediately retracted, her figure somersaulting backwards to meet one of the Righteous Alliance's disciple who was brandishing his blade. Similarly, her figure also leapt up, the small sword piercing out from a strange angle. The target was the disciple's throat. That disciple was unable to stop in time. He moved upwards, sending his throat to the tip of the small sword. That small sword touched his throat and immediately retracted. Her figure did not stop, immediately turning around and floating towards the last disciple. The last disciple was a smart one. Seeing that the situation was not good, he did not move forward at all. Instead, he leaned and leapt out of the field. By the time Zhang Xiaohua turned around, she was already quite a distance away. Zhang Xiaohua had already announced her name. Naturally, she did not have any mercy. She used the levitation technique. Her body seemed to float in the air, floating on the ground. In a few blinks of an eye, she had already caught up to that disciple. She lifted her leg and lightly kicked that disciple's back. That disciple had started early, so his qigong was passable. He was rejoicing. Who would have thought that there was no sound of wind behind him? But his back seemed to have been hit by a 1,000-jin heavy object. He saw stars, spat out a mouthful of blood and immediately lost consciousness. His body flew diagonally far away before collapsing to the ground. Zhang Xiaohua kicked out, no longer paying attention to him. She kept the small sword, clapped her hands, and walked back with a smile. That Misty School's disciple seemed to have seen a monster. He looked at the ordinary, thin-looking youth walking towards him in disbelief. He said, You! In the end, he did not finish his sentence. Zhang Xiaohua looked at him, sat cross-legged on the ground, and said with a smile, Senior, the annoying flies are gone, this world is quiet, you can tell me about the Misty School. Then, looking at his bloody right hand, he said, Senior brother, you'd better clean up the wound on your hand or the wound on your body. I don't have any experience in this area, and I don't have any medicine or anything like that on me. At this time, that Misty School's disciple came to his senses and said, It's fine, it's just a small matter, brother, wait a moment, I can handle it myself. After that, this disciple methodically took out something from his chest, applied medicine on the wound on his body, hand, and other places. He was very skilled. After waiting for him to finish, he came forward and saluted again, saying, Brother, I was really rude just now, but in the past few years, my Misty School's disciples have been in danger, so I had to be careful. By the way, brother, what did you say you were called? Zhang Xiaohua laughed involuntarily and said, I'm the servant of the Huanxi Manor's herbs. My name is Zhang Xiaohua. I've been working with He Tianshu in the Huanxi Manor's pharmacy. Oh, brother, you're called Zhang Xiaohua. I'm Chu Yunfei of the Divine Machine Hall. Divine Machine Hall? I have some impression of it, but I've only been to the Misty Mountain Villa a few times, so I don't know many disciples. Alas, in the current Jianghu, if there is no conspiracy, no one will admit that they are from the Misty School. My Divine Machine Hall is basically just a name now. Oh, by the way, brother, are you really the servant of the Huanxi Manor's herbs? But how can your martial arts be so high? Moreover, you can even use the ethereal steps of our Misty School. This? Zhang Xiaohua was a little hesitant. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua was a little hesitant, Chu Yunfei quickly said, Brother Zhang, if you have any difficulties, you don't have to say it. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, There's nothing difficult about it. It's just that I had an agreement with sect leader O earlier, so I couldn't tell you about it. However, I'm indeed from Huanxi Manor, and I've seen Chiu Tong and Manor Lord O Yen. Is that so? Then I won't ask further. By the way, I just heard that the disciples of the Righteous Alliance said that the Misty School was destroyed. Where is Master O now? How is the Huanxi Manor now? What's going on? I only heard a few words just now, and I'm confused. Senior brother, please clear my doubts. Chu Yunfei smiled bitterly and said, Brother Zhang, have you not been in Jianghu for a long time? Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, Yes, I've been trapped in a place. After leaving the Huanxi Manor, I haven't been in Jianghu for 4 or 5 years. Alas, I see. Brother Zhang, the Misty School was destroyed 3 years ago. Master O. -3. Chapter 330. Ah? Really? But I don't know what happened. No matter what, the Misty School is still a big sect in Jianghu. How can it be destroyed just like that? Moreover, all the thousands of disciples in the Misty School died for the sect? Chu Yunfei bitterly smiled and said, In this world, there is no sect that can stand forever. My Misty School has been declining for a long time. To be able to stand for 10,000 years in this unpredictable Jianghu is already a miracle. I heard that a long time ago, there was an extremely powerful Shenao sect. It seemed to be 100 times stronger than my Misty School, but wasn't it also destroyed before us? However, less than half of the elite disciples of the sect managed to escape. The rest of the disciples died on the spot. Buzz! Zhang Xiaohua suddenly stood up and said in a trembling voice, Only less than half of the elite disciples managed to escape? The rest died for the sect? Then did a disciple called Zhang Xiaohu manage to escape? Zhang Xiaohu? Chu Yunfei was dazed for a moment and said, Zhang Xiaohu, this name is very familiar. Let me think. Oh, I know. He used his connections to enter my Misty School. Later, he got lucky and was accepted by Marshal Uncle Wen. Yes, it's that lucky guy. Did he also manage to escape? At this time, Zhang Xiaohua didn't care what other people said about her second brother. She hurriedly asked. No! Chu Yunfei decisively replied. Ah! Zhang Xiaohua exclaimed. She clenched her teeth and clenched her fists. Just as she was about to ask which sect attacked the Misty Mountain Villa, Chu Yunfei said another sentence. Zhang Xiaohua almost fainted. However, Zhang Xiaohu doesn't seem to have died. Ah! Zhang Xiaohua nearly fell to the ground with a thud. He thought to himself, Senior brother, can you not speak like that? Can't you finish your sentence in one sentence? Zhang Xiaohua stepped forward and asked. Then, where is Zhang Xiaohu now? Well, I'm not sure if Zhang Xiaohu is dead or not. This time, Zhang Xiaohua fell in front of Chu Yunfei. Even the Righteous Alliance's 3 experts hadn't been able to force back Zhang Xiaohua. But Chu Yunfei had done it. Zhang Xiaohua forced herself to get up and thought to herself. My senior brother from Misty School, can we be more specific? Although this little sweetheart of yours has been tempered with immortal cultivation techniques, it still can't withstand your torment. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua lose her composure, Chu Yunfei felt embarrassed and said, Little brother, are you too tired? Those 3 Righteous Alliance's disciples are not ordinary experts. They have been chasing me for several days. If you are tired, you should take a rest first. Zhang Xiaohua waved his hand and said, Senior brother Chu, it's better if you don't. If you have the time, please tell me about the Misty Sect. I will be very grateful. So it's like this. Actually, what happened at Misty School that day is known by everyone in Jianghu. You can find anyone to inquire about it. Sigh, sad things should be told to sad people. Brother, listen to senior brother tell you about the sad things. Thus, the 2 of them sat on the ground. With Chu Yunfei's tireless narration, Zhang Xiaohua learned about the events of that year. It was in autumn 3 years ago. It was the day when all things were competing with each other. But in this day of harvest and looking forward to the future, Misty School's sect leader O Peng was sitting on a chair with a headache. He had the urge to use his thumb to fiercely rub his temples. Ever since he subdued Shui Yupeng a year ago and gave her the position of vice-sect leader of Misty School, he firmly controlled the Luo Shui gang under the Misty School. The strength of the entire Misty School greatly increased. The results greatly stimulated the ambitions of the 6 Misty Tigers. They all wanted to make contributions that no one had ever made in their lifetime. However, just as O Peng finished organizing the resources of the Luo Shui gang, coordinated the water and land forces of the Misty School, and prepared to revive the immortal Tao and once again set his sights on Jianghu, he felt that it was difficult to move forward. Moreover, he had suffered an inexplicable setback. Let's first talk about the revival of the immortal Tao. Since he already knew that the heaven and earth yuan qi in this world was recovering, and at this time, he also discovered Zhang Xiuhua's Big Dipper fist, which seemed to be an inheritance of the immortal Tao, and at this time, Openg almost thought that he was the godfather of the immortal Tao. He excitedly used an extremely cheap price to exchange for the manual of the Big Dipper fist. At that time, he sent his eldest disciple, Zhang Qingyue, to impart the Big Dipper fist to the only son of the deputy chief, Shui Tiantian. Although Shui Tiantian was only 4 years old, but he was considered to be a genius. In a short period of time, he was proficient in the Big Dipper fist, and practiced the Big Dipper fist no less than 5 times a day. Of course, since Shui Tiantian was a genius, and when Openg persuaded Shui Yupeng to join the Misty School, he also promised to teach him all the divine skills of the Misty School. At this time, he naturally couldn't hide anything from Shui Tiantian. Everything that could be taught was picked out for Shui Tiantian. Shui Yupeng was beaming with joy as she watched, and worked even harder for the Misty School. Shui Tiantian was like a sponge absorbing water, seriously absorbing the essence of the inheritance of the Misty School. Regarding the Big Dipper fist, Shui Tiantian was quite knowledgeable. Although Shui Tiantian was only 4 years old, but he was also considered to be a genius. In a short period of time, he was proficient in the Big Dipper fist, and practiced the Big Dipper fist no less than 5 times a day. Of course, since Shui Tiantian was a genius, and when Openg persuaded Shui Yupeng to join the Misty School, he also promised to teach him all the divine skills of the Misty School. At this time, he naturally couldn't hide anything from Shui Tiantian. Everything that could be taught was picked out for Shui Tiantian. Shui Yupeng was all smiles as she watched, and worked even harder for the Misty School. Shui Tiantian was like a sponge absorbing water, seriously absorbing the essence of the inheritance of the Misty School. Ethereal steps, etc. Therefore, other than practicing 3 times a day in the morning, noon, and night, Shui Tiantian spent the rest of his time comprehending the ethereal steps and ethereal divine art. Although Shui Tiantian's progress in the latter two had exceeded Zhang Qingyue's and Openg's expectations, the two's attention was not on this. Instead, it was on the seemingly ordinary and error-filled Big Dipper magical fist technique. Shui Tiantian had been practicing the Big Dipper magical fist technique for more than half a year, but there was nothing abnormal about it. Other than his arm strength being slightly stronger than an ordinary child's, there was nothing else that could be seen. And you want to say that Shui Tiantian did not try his best to practice the Big Dipper magical fist technique? That was not right. The Big Dipper magical fist technique was the fist technique that he had learned. After mastering it, he did not give up and practiced it 3 or even 5 times a day. If it was any other fist technique, not to mention 3 times, even 1 or several times a day would not be a small number. After all, the people of the martial arts world still emphasized on internal strength. Could it be that this arm strength was the effect of the Big Dipper magical fist technique? Thinking about how Zhang Xiuhua's arms were different from an ordinary person's, Openg sometimes could not help but come to this conclusion. Later, when the Misty School recruited young disciples again in the 2nd year, Openg specially requested Zhang Qingyue to select a group of disciples with good talent, and teach them the Big Dipper magical fist technique as a compulsory fist technique. However, the results were still not very obvious. It was similar to Shui Tiantian's situation. His arm strength had increased a lot, but there were no other abnormalities. In his disappointment, Openg thought of the missing Zhang Xiuhua. If Openg had not seen the exquisite moves of the Big Dipper magical fist technique, which were different from the current fist techniques, and the entire fist technique's attack and defense, Openg would not have felt sorry for the 1,000 taels of silver he had spent. This Zhang Xiuhua actually went missing as soon as she left the Misty School. She did not even do a good job in the after-sales service. Speaking of Zhang Xiuhua's disappearance, Openg was also helpless. In fact, When Zhang Xiaohua asked for leave from the Misty School, he was not very willing. However, Zhang Xiaohua was not a disciple of the Misty School, and was also the subordinate of his own biological sister. It was not good for him to interfere. As for Zhang Xiaohu, it was just unintentional. Whether he went back or left the Misty School had nothing to do with Oping, so he naturally agreed very quickly. What Oping did not expect was that Zhang Xiaohu went back to the Misty School, but Zhang Xiaohua did not come back. What came back was the news of Zhang Xiaohua's disappearance. Oping was furious and almost wanted to slap Zhang Xiaohu to death. However, looking at Zhang Xiaohu's absent-minded and guilty face, he endured it again and again. However, he did not dare to be too loud and quickly sent a few capable disciples to inquire about the news. In fact, before Zhang Xiaohu returned to the mountain, he risked his life to inquire about Zhang Xiaohua in Shitsui Mountain. After he settled Li Jinfeng's family and waited for a day in Lu Town, he still did not see any trace of Zhang Xiaohua. He felt something was wrong and did not dare to return to the Guizhuang house. Instead, he went straight to Shitsui Mountain. Knowing that there was a tiger in the mountain, he still went to the mountain. His own biological brother was there, so why would he care about his own safety? At that time, he only blamed himself for not staying, but left his younger brother behind. He also blamed himself for not being able to stay for his younger brother because of his poor martial arts. But since things had turned out this way, what was the use of more self-blame? It was not until Zhang Xiaohu went to Shitsui Mountain without hesitation that he found that the whole mountain was in chaos. Some people were fighting with their fists, some were fighting with their swords, and most of them were running down the mountain with small cloth bags on their backs. Zhang Xiaohua crouched on the side of the road, looking at this and that. None of them were good people, and he was surrounded by people, so he did not dare to show up casually. It was not until the sky was getting dark that he stopped an older bandit. After asking him, he knew that Shitsui Mountain was not the same as it was a few days ago. Shitsui Mountain no longer existed, just like a few years ago. It turned out that night, Zhang Xiaohua was captured by Qin Shirue. Qin Shirue asked Ding Fei to carry him, and he returned to the mountain village to search carefully, but he still found nothing. In his rage, he killed many soldiers on duty and all the elites of Shitsui Mountain, causing great panic. After Qin Shirue left, these mountain bandits swarmed to find their fort master. Unfortunately, their fort master was also killed in his own room. Then, the mountain bandits were in a mess, thinking that their mountain village had provoked a martial arts master and someone was coming to seek revenge. The whole mountain village was like a group of dragons without a leader. Well, the whole front half of the dragon was gone, leaving only those with poor martial arts and undisciplined people. They did not have the awareness that the mountain village is their home. Some people even saw the open secret room and found some scattered jewelry in the corner. So, the internal strife of people dying for wealth and birds dying for food was really staged. -3. Chapter 331. After fighting and killing, the result was really seen. The property of Li Jinfeng's family was found, and the private goods hidden by other people were also found. It was like pouring cold water into a hot pot of oil, and the pot exploded in an instant. The scene became more difficult to control. More people were killed and injured, and the property was also robbed in a mess. It was not until Zhang Xiaohu came to Shitsui Mountain again that the dog-eat-dog farce came to an end. The surviving people took their own gains, got off the pirate ship, abandoned the darkness for the light, and found a way out. Zhang Xiaohu was confused by the words of the bandit. When did his brother become so powerful? Was there such a divine power? But no matter how carefully he asked, he couldn't get anything. After all, those who could survive now were extremely cunning old bandits. Moreover, the bandit himself didn't see Qin Shirue kill people. As he said, the martial arts master killed people like slaughtering chickens. The people on the wall of the stockade were killed before they had time to react. The rest of the people woke up and shouted loudly. When they fled, many more were killed. When the others woke up, it was already dawn. The martial arts master had already gone far away. Who could see the true face of Mount Lu? With a mind full of doubts, Zhang Xiaohu let the bandit go first. He couldn't block the bandit's way of turning over a new leaf, could he? But Zhang Xiaohu heard the lethality of the martial arts master. He was definitely not his brother, Zhang Xiaohua. But since this person was not his younger brother, then where did his younger brother go? Was he killed by the martial arts master who came to seek revenge as a bandit? Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua could no longer ambush on the side of the road. He jumped up and went up Shitsui Mountain along the mountain road. When Zhang Xiaohu stepped into the gate of Shitsui Mountain, there was a mess in front of him. Fortunately, the bandits in the stockade were used to disbanding. They robbed in an orderly manner and didn't set fire to the stockade. It seemed that they planned to go up the mountain again. There were only worthless corpses scattered all over the ground. Many bandits in the stockade had already run away. The rest were the old, weak, sick, and disabled, puppies and kittens. No one cared that a stranger would come to the stockade. Moreover, this person only looked at each corpse carefully. They thought that this guy just came to take the wealth of the dead. They all sneered in their hearts. Why did this guy only think of it now? The corpses underground have been swept away by us countless times. How can there be any surplus wealth? Then they were busy with their own things and went crazy for the last time. There were hundreds of corpses on the ground. Zhang Xiaohu looked through them one by one, regardless of their body shape or dress, for fear of missing something. Every time he turned over a corpse, he was afraid to see a familiar face. But after examining all the corpses, Zhang Xiaohu was overjoyed. Since there were no corpses, there must be hope of survival. So he worked hard again to look through all the places in the stockade, but still found nothing. At this time, he was completely relieved. Thinking of his brother's lightness skill, he must have run away. Right, at that time, Zhang Xiaohu suddenly had a thought. Did Xiaohua go back to the Guizhuang house first? The steady Zhang Xiaohu did not immediately return home. Instead, he looked through all the corpses again until the sky brightened. After working all night, he was full of energy and rode back to the Guizhuang house. He was really looking forward to when he returned to the Guizhuang house. His younger brother would be holding a bowl of rice and squatting under a tree, laughing at him for coming back so late. How could he be so stupid that he didn't know to go back to the Guizhuang house first? But when he rushed back to the Guizhuang house and saw his mother and sister-in-law waiting for him at the village entrance, he knew that something was wrong. His heart turned cold. Xiaohua really did not come back. Zhang Xiaohu's mind turned countless times, but he did not have any good excuses. If he said that Zhang Xiaohua went back or did something else, how could he explain the empty date red horse beside him? But if he told his mother about Zhang Xiaohua's disappearance, how could he open his mouth? Guosufei, who was at the village entrance, was also bitterly waiting for her two sons to return. First, she comforted herself that Li Jinfeng's family was warm and wanted them to stay for one more day. But 2 days had passed. Which family would have such a reason to keep their guests? As a result, Guosufei could no longer sit still. She had been waiting at the entrance of the village the night before yesterday, hoping that her son would return. Last night, she also did not sleep well. At dawn, she had been waiting at the entrance of the village. When it was close to noon, she saw a familiar date red horse appear. Her heart was filled with joy, but she immediately saw an empty horse. That horse was missing her heart. When Zhang Xiaohu arrived at the village entrance and dismounted from the horse, Guosufei tightly grabbed Zhang Xiaohu's arm, gritted her teeth, and interrogated Zhang Xiaohua's whereabouts. Zhang Xiaohu's face was ashen. How could he dare to tell the truth at the village entrance? He only pulled his sister-in-law and dragged his mother back to the small courtyard. When the whole family was gathered, he told the whole story. When she heard that her own son, who was trying to save someone, had ended up missing, Guosufei could not help but feel sad. She knew that her son's actions were the actions of a man and were righteous. But after all, the person he saved was a stranger she had never seen before, and the one who went missing was her son, who she was worried about. How could she not cry? Zhang Kai and Mr. Liu had different feelings. After all, they were both born as strict fathers. They felt that for a child to do such a righteous and awe-inspiring thing, it was exactly what a man should do. They were quite proud. Even if they were on the side, they would still encourage and gladly go forward. Moreover, they still had not received the most serious grievous news. And Zhang Xiaohua had acted for righteousness, so she must be loved by heaven and earth. How could she die so easily? Alas, how could they know that heaven and earth were heartless and treated all living things like straw dogs? In this world, how much righteousness could be preached and how much good intentions could be rewarded. If Zhang Xiaohua had not been coincidentally lucky, she would have been captured and taken to the Dragon God sect long ago. Who knew what her ending would be? Everyone tried to persuade Guosufei, but they could not ease the knot in her heart. In the end, it was Mr. Liu, who was not involved in the matter, who probed. Could we ask the Misty School to help Zhang Xiaohua? This sentence was like an epiphany, waking Zhang Xiaohua up. Yes, his abilities were limited, but he had a powerful sect behind him. With such a great resource, how could he not make full use of it? After thinking about it, Zhang Xiaohu did not have the mood to stay at home. He packed his luggage and immediately set off from the Guozhuang house. He rushed back to the Misty School in Pingyang City overnight. He also made an appointment with his family. Once there was any news, he would ask someone to inform them immediately. After Zhang Xiaohu rushed back to the Misty School, he did not know how to ask for help. He could not possibly ask sect leader O directly, and say that his younger brother was missing and see if he could help look for him. Zhang Xiaohu could imagine that he would definitely be chased out by O Ping. Therefore, he could only ask his master, Wen Wehai, for help. Wen Wehai was also rather helpless. Although he was O Peng's personal disciple, he did not hold any real power in the sect. He did not have the right to mobilize the disciples of the Divine Mechanics Division. Therefore, Wen Wehai also took the time to find an opportunity to tactfully convey this request to eldest senior brother Zhang Qingwei, hoping that Zhang Qingwei would extend a helping hand on the account that they were fellow disciples of the same sect. Zhang Qingwei naturally knew the importance of Zhang Xiaohua. When he heard this, he did not even say a second word to Wen Wehai. He immediately rushed out of the door and hurriedly informed O Ping of this news, leaving Wen Wehai stunned at the side. He thought that eldest senior brother was angry over this small matter. Just as Wen Wehai apologetically told Zhang Xiaohu that he might not be able to help and that he could look for O Yen, Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly rushed over to look for Zhang Xiaohu. When Zhang Xiaohu arrived at the meeting hall and repeated the matter of Zhang Xiaohua's disappearance, Zhang Xiaohu's reaction was far beyond his expectations. Sect leader O immediately sent 10 disciples of the Divine Mechanics Division to Shitsui Mountain to find Zhang Xiaohua's whereabouts. They wanted to see her alive or dead. Zhang Xiaohu was touched. He did not expect sect leader O to be so benevolent. A professional was a professional. Not long after, the disciples of the Divine Mechanics Division brought back the news. Although they did not find Zhang Xiaohua's whereabouts, they found out that Shitsui Mountain was related to the Dragon God sect. On the day of the incident at Shitsui Mountain, there was a special envoy from the Tenrya sect present in the stronghold. When he heard this news, O Ping hesitated. At this time, the Righteous Alliance and the Tenrya sect were at loggerheads. However, there was no direct conflict. Many people related to the Righteous Alliance were killed by the Tenrya sect's disciples, and many of them were exterminated. However, the Righteous Alliance did not dare to fight the Tenrya sect head-on. They only made solemn statements and seriously protested. Occasionally, they skirted around the edges and scratched at the weak spots of the Tenrya sect. Even the super sects of Jianghu were so docile, so how could O Ping not avoid them? He sternly ordered the disciples of the Divine Mechanics Division to quickly return to the stronghold. At the same time, he ordered Zhang Qingwei to temporarily postpone the plan for the path of immortality. He was afraid that the Tenrya sect had other intentions for kidnapping Zhang Xiaohua, or that they had learned the importance of the Fist of the North Star from Zhang Xiaohua. As for Zhang Xiaohu, O Ping only said that the disciples of the Divine Mechanics Division had not found any news about Zhang Xiaohua and were half-heartedly brushing him off. As for Zhang Xiaohu, he did not have any news about his younger brother. Naturally, he was unable to pass any information to the Guizhuang house. He could only hope that the two elders at home would be able to recover from their grief with time. Time flew by. Soon, it had been almost a year since Zhang Xiaohua went missing. Who knew how many sorrows, joys, and separations had happened in the Jianghu? Other than Zhang Xiaohu, who would still remember Zhang Xiaohua, who had been in the limelight at the Misty School's martial arts competition. Perhaps only Peng was unable to restrain the passion in his heart. When he saw that the Tenria sect did not seem to care about the Misty School and placed his hopes on the Fist of the North Star once again, he was extremely disappointed. Only then would he remember Zhang Xiaohua, the originator of the Fist of the North Star. At this moment, Peng was not only vexed about the setback of the Path of Immortality's revival plan, but also about something else. -3. Chapter 332. In the past month, all of the ethereal sect's branches, strongholds, and even escort agencies had been wiped out by an unknown force. Many of their elite disciples had gone missing, forcing sect leader O to slowly withdraw his forces to the vicinity of Pingyang City. However, the Divine Secrets Hall's disciples that he had sent out to gather information either never returned or did not receive any news at all. Left with no choice, Peng sent out the fourth of the 6 ethereal tigers, Shanghuan Fenglu, and the 6th Su Peihua, to lead a group of elite disciples to personally investigate the matter. With such a crisis hanging over his head like a sharp sword, how could Peng not be vexed? Who was the mastermind behind this series of events? This was a question that had always troubled Peng. Peng felt like he was scratching an itch. He knew that it was extremely itchy, but he just couldn't reach out to scratch it. He couldn't even scratch his ears and cheeks. Suddenly, a thought appeared in Peng's mind. Could it be the Dragon God sect? Could it be that after Zhang Xiaohua was captured by the Tenria sect, he was tortured to extort a confession? Why torture him? He's just a village boy. The Tenria sect has plenty of ways to make him talk. So, Zhang Xiaohua revealed everything about his Fist of the North Star? The Tenria sect is a great sect with a heritage similar to the Misty School. If I can see through it myself, Dishir Tian of the Tenria sect must also be aware of it. Could it be that the Tenria sect is trying to cover up the revival of the Immortal Tao? Or is it because they want to leave before my Misty School that they suddenly attacked my Misty School? Sigh, I shouldn't have been soft-hearted back then. Peng's eyes flashed with a hint of sternness. But after a while, there was a burst of confusion in his eyes. This is also not right. Even if Sakura knows the secret of the Big Dipper magical fist, whether or not this Big Dipper magical fist is actually the big heavenly cycle of stars fist is still two different things. He didn't settle the matter first and cultivate his own immortal Tao disciple. Besides, the Tenria sect's strength is comparable to the combined strength of the 3 super sections. They have always been restrained by the 3 super sections. If they were to harm my Misty School, the other 3 sects would definitely react. Why is there no news at all? Could it be? Peng's heart, which had been tempered to be strong, suddenly jumped. He instantly thought of another possibility, unless, right at this moment, someone rushed into the assembly hall in a hurry. Peng was startled. He looked up and saw that it was his eldest disciple, Zhang Qingyue. Peng frowned slightly. Zhang Qingyue's face was pale and he was very flustered. Zhang Qingyue had always been experienced and steady in handling matters. He had never been so rude. Therefore, he didn't have the intention to scold Zhang Qingyue and asked, "Qingyue, why are you so flustered? Big sect master, there's a big disaster." Hearing Peng's dissatisfied tone, Zhang Qingyue already knew that he was being rude. However, it wasn't the time to pay attention to it. Big disaster? Peng's heart jumped, and he blurted out. Did the Tenria sect besiege my Misty Mountain Manor? No, big sect master, no enemies appeared around our Misty School. It's just that. Zhang Qingyue's tone was somewhat hesitant. Then, he looked at Peng's gaze and said with gritted teeth, Big sect master, 4th martial uncle and 6th martial uncle. Openg couldn't help but ask. What happened to them? Zhang Qinghua said with some sorrow. 2 martial uncles were killed and their corpses were brought back by the disciples of the sect. What? Openg exclaimed and immediately stood up from his chair. 4th martial uncle, Shangguan Fenglu, was quick-witted and resourceful. 6th martial uncle, Su Peihua, was the best in Jianghu. When the 2 of them were roaming Jianghu, they were always together and had been through a lot. Now, the 2 of them had taken elixirs to increase their power. There were few opponents in Jianghu who could match them. But now, they were both killed at the same time. This was something he never expected. Quick, where are the corpses of the 2 martial brothers? Reporting to Big Sect Master, it's in the square in front of the conference hall. This disciple doesn't dare to act rashly. Hearing this, Openg stomped his right foot, and his body floated up. He flew like a gust of wind to the entrance of the conference hall. His figure was 70% similar to Zhang Xiaohua's. From the chair to the door, Openg's feet basically didn't have any place to touch the ground. It was also very similar to Zhang Xiaohua's levitation technique. The square in front of the conference hall was still empty. There was only a broken carriage parked there alone. Beside it, there were a few dejected and injured disciples. Openg jumped down from the high platform. When the disciples saw him, they immediately saluted. Openg didn't even look at them. He walked to the front of the carriage and lifted the mat on the carriage with a trembling hand. Seeing the familiar lifeless face under the mat, Openg's heart couldn't help but ache and almost shed tears. This was the person he had grown up with, practiced martial arts with, and roamed the Jianghu with. They weren't blood brothers, but they were better than blood brothers. Now, this person was quietly lying in this shabby carriage, closing the eyes that had cared for him for dozens of years. Openg raised his head and shouted sternly, "What are you doing? Why didn't you buy the best coffins and use the best carriages to bring the 2 elders back?" The disciples were submissive. Only one of them mustered up the courage and said, "Sect leader, it's not that I didn't want to buy the coffins for the 2 elders. It's just that after the attack, the masked man in black had already prepared the carriage and mat. He told me not to move them. He also said that if I moved them and sect leader didn't notice anything wrong, I would be responsible for everything. I was afraid that I would delay the sect's important matters, so I rushed back and didn't dare to move them." Hearing his disciples' words, Openg clenched his teeth and regained his senses. He waved his hand and said, "All right, Qingyu, send someone to call eldest martial uncle, 2nd martial uncle, and 5th martial uncle here. Also, carefully carry the bodies of the 2 martial uncles to the Divine Engineering Hall. Have Hall Master Sher and the Hall Elders examine them first. I want to see who was so bold as to touch the people of our misty school. This debt of blood must be paid with blood. Also, the few of you, tell me in detail what happened when you were attacked." After he finished speaking, Openg didn't call the disciples to the hall of assembly. Instead, he asked them in detail in the square. When Zhang Qinghua heard this, he did not dare to tarry. He hurriedly called someone over and carefully instructed them to inform the 3 elders. He personally drove the carriage and brought the corpses of his 2 martial uncles to the Divine Mechanics Hall. The attack on Shangguan Fenglu and the others was very old-fashioned. The enemy didn't set up many traps. They just waited in one of the Misty School's branches. This branch was located in the corner of an extremely small town. There weren't many people there. When Shangguan Fenglu and the others arrived, it was already dusk. The group of more than 10 people was ambushed as soon as they arrived at the branch's courtyard. The elite disciples of the Misty School were very conceited. After all, they had been through the test of blood and fire. They also had 2 elders by their side. Naturally, they didn't plan to escape. They only wanted to avenge their brothers. It was a pity that the opponents who had set up the ambush seemed to have already predicted it. Or rather, the opponents were extremely powerful. Although their numbers were not much higher than the ethereal sect, the moment the ethereal sect's disciples exchanged blows with them, they realized that the men in black who had set up the ambush were all experts in the martial arts world. They actually managed to trap all the ethereal sect's disciples in the courtyard and none of them were able to escape. Shangguan Fenglu and Su Peiwa, who were holding the line, weren't in a better situation. They were facing three masters who were also masked in black. The three of them worked together to suppress the two of them. However, the two elders of the Misty School had taken the authentic strength-enhancing panacea, so they had more internal energy than their opponents. Even with Shangguan Fenlu's lightness skill, it was very likely that he could escape. However, if he ran away, Su Peiwa, who was left behind, would die. Therefore, Shangguan Fenglu could only fight side by side with Su Peiwa, hoping that they could fight their way out. Although the battle was divided into two groups, it was equally fierce and bloody. By the time night fell, the disciples of the Misty School had been completely annihilated. Only a few who were waiting to be used were left with their acupoints sealed. Shangguan Fenglu and Su Peiwa were also seriously injured. They were barely holding on. At this moment, a yellow-faced old man who hadn't been seen before floated over. Seeing the situation, he was very surprised. What's wrong? These two people are so difficult to deal with. Why haven't they succeeded yet? Shangguan Fenglu and Su Peiwa were shocked when they saw this person. Just as they were about to call out his name, the yellow-faced old man came in and hit their chests with his palm. In an instant, the two of them spat out blood and fell to the ground, dead before they could even say a word. The yellow-faced old man looked around and said proudly, "Act according to the original plan. Get someone to bring these two bodies back to the Misty School." Then, he floated away. When the injured disciple finished telling the whole story of the attack, Peng's frown deepened. These disciples' kung fu was weak. They were the ones who were supposed to contact and guide the disciples. When they were attacked, they could only take care of themselves. How could they have the time to observe and collect other information? Moreover, when their acupoints were sealed, they only heard a few words and knew that a master of the masters had arrived and killed the two elders in one move. How could they know who this master was? At this moment, another disciple whispered, "Grand Gang Leader, this disciple secretly saw something." "Tell me quickly," Peng said anxiously. Among the three people who besieged the elders, one of them was wearing a felt hat. It was very strange, so I took a few more glances at him. Moreover, when they let us go, I took another glance at that person. At this time, his felt hat was gone. I reckon that the two elders had taken it away, but he was bald. The Dalan Temple. Peng called out the name of this sect. If there was a sect that had the strength to wipe out so many elite disciples of the Misty School, and even two elders, then the Dalan Temple should be one of them. If there was a recent grudge with the Misty School, then the Dalan Temple should be at the top of the list. -3. Chapter 333. At this time, from the corner of the square, three people quickly walked over. They were Misty Sect's Huyuni, Li Jian, Li Lao, Lu Qingyang, and Lu Laowu. The three of them came together and looked at Peng and the several injured disciples with astonishment. They asked, "Big sect leader, do you have any clues? Who's the one playing tricks behind us?" Peng waved at the disciples to let them go back and recover. He then turned to look at the three brothers who had grown up with him. He bit his lip and tears welled up in his eyes. He opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. Huyuni was careful and asked immediately, "What's wrong, third? What happened?" Lu Qingyang smiled. "Third brother, what are you afraid of? The Misty School has been through more than one or two crises. Didn't we get through them all safely? Oh right, where are fourth and sixth? Sixth still owes me 2 rounds of wine. That bastard's external skills are so bad that he's no match for me." His words seemed to have hit the softest spot in Peng's heart. Tears welled up in his eyes. Peng immediately turned his face away and swiped his finger in the air to cover it up. "They're at the Divine Mechanics Hall right now. Let's go take a look. That bastard Sixth didn't look for me first. Damn it!" Lu Qingyang was still careless and walked towards the Divine Mechanics Hall. Huyuni looked at Li Jian in surprise. He was about to ask Peng again when Peng also started walking and followed closely behind Lu Qingyang. A cold light flashed in Li Jian's eyes and he quickly followed. Perhaps he, who was the calmest, had realized something. Just as they reached the front of the Divine Mechanics Hall, they saw Zhang Qingwei rush out. He stopped when he saw the four of them and waited for O Peng to approach before whispering. Sect leader, Hall Master Shi, and the others have seen it. Is it the Dalan Temple's technique? Before Zhang Qingwei could reply, Lu Qingyang shouted. What? The Dalan Temple's technique? Oh my, is Lu Qingyang injured? I told him to practice the Golden Bell Shield earlier. Now look, the old bald donkeys from the Dalan Temple are so cunning. Lu Qingyang is going to have a hard time. By the way, Old Sixth is injured. Why didn't he go to the pharmacy? In an instant, Hu Laode and Li Lao, who were following behind him, seemed to have understood something. They rushed forward, ignoring O Peng and Lu Qingyang, and rushed into the Divine Machine Hall. O Peng raised his hand in an attempt to stop her, but he only managed to raise his arm a little before it fell limply to the ground. Old Fifth Lu didn't understand and followed him in. Just as O Peng was about to take a step forward, Zhang Qingwei said, Grand Sect Master, the two martial uncles didn't die at the hands of the Dalan Temple. The two fatal palm prints on their bodies were from the Righteous Alliance's Grand Universe Palm. Ah? Zhang San's Grand Universe Palm? How is this possible? O Peng was even more surprised. At this moment, Old Fifth Lu's sorrowful shout came from the Divine Mechanics Hall. Old Fourth! Old Six! What followed was a burst of wailing. O Peng looked at the door of the Divine Mechanics Hall. His feet moved slightly, but he quickly retracted them. Standing there silently, O Peng stroked the short beard on his chin and frowned deeply. After a while, he instructed Zhang Qingwei. Qingwei, hurry and inform the disciples to be on full alert from now on. I reckon that there will be strong enemies coming soon. Be prepared to drag Ethereal Peak in. Also, send more men to move all the precious items in the manor to the secret chamber. If anything happens, we'll defend against the enemies with the mountain. This manor is easy to attack but hard to defend. We can only rely on Ethereal Peak. Oh right, also, find someone to send the young mistress to Ethereal Peak. This has to be done first. Zhang Qingyue's expression froze when he heard that. He hurriedly accepted the order and was about to leave. O Peng stopped him and whispered in his ear. Zhang Qingwei was shocked and puzzled. He asked, Master, are we really going to do this? O Peng nodded. Let's do it. It's either the fish dies or the net breaks. Even if we die, we'll make sure that their efforts are in vain. But Master, will this person succeed? Sigh, man proposes, God disposes. Who knows? Zhang Qingwei nodded and left with the order. O Peng sighed as he watched Zhang Qingwei leave in a hurry. Then, he took a deep breath and tidied his clothes before walking steadily into the Divine Secrets Hall. In the Divine Secrets Hall, 2 tall wooden coffins were placed in the middle. Although the sun was shining brightly and a lot of sunlight shone in, it was still desolate. The Divine Secrets Hall Shiyukuin and 2 white-haired elders stood beside the coffins with their hands clasped behind their backs. They looked sad. Big Bro Hu and Li Lao stood on the other side, staring at their 2 junior brothers in the coffins. No one knew what they were thinking. Only Old Fifth Lu held onto Su Lao's hand like a child. Tears streamed down his face. O Peng quietly walked to a corner of the coffins. He did not speak and just looked at it quietly, as if he was reminiscing about the past. The entire Divine Secrets Hall had long lost its former solemnity. Only sorrow filled the entire hall. After a while, Old Fifth Lu had cried enough. He jumped up, wiped his tears and ran to O Peng. He tugged at O Peng's clothes and shouted, Lao Lu, who did it? Was it the bald donkeys from the Dalan Temple? Which one? I must settle this with him today so that 6th brother can rest in peace in the underworld. O Peng looked at Lu Qingyang and said softly, Lao Lu, calm down and listen to me. Calm down my ass. How can I calm down? Lao Lu and Lao were killed and they even sent someone to their doorstep. Isn't this a slap to the Misty School's face? If I don't take revenge, my surname is no longer Lu. Lao Lu, tell me who it is. Is it Changdong or Changxing? Did Changxing do it himself? Openg said with a gloomy face. The fatal injuries on Laolu and Laolu were caused by Zhang San from the Righteous Alliance. However, it was said that there were monks involved. I suspect that the Dalan Temple was involved. Zhang San? This ruffian has never interfered with our Misty School. How dare he do this? I'm going to find him. After old Fifth Lu finished speaking, he swung his arm and was about to rush out. How could Openg let him go? He pulled him back and advised. Laolu, where are you going to find him? Are you going to kill your way to the Righteous Alliance's main peak? Even if it's the Righteous Alliance's righteous peak, so what? At the very least, I'm about 200 pounds. I'm going to go against the Righteous Alliance. Old Fifth Lu was full of pride. He threw Openg's hand away and was about to leave. At this moment, Big Boss Hu scolded. Laolu, stop. Don't you think it's chaotic now? Do you want us to worry about you? Do you want us to watch you get sent back by someone else? Old Fifth Lu listened to Big Boss Hu the most. Naturally, he didn't dare to move half a step. He only said loudly, "But big brother, Laolu and Laolu." After saying that, he stomped his feet vigorously. In the end, he squatted down and used his fists to hit the ground. After a few hits, blood dripped from his fists. Seeing this, Big Boss Hu sighed and didn't stop him. Openg walked over and patted Lu Qingyang's shoulder, saying, Laolu, get up. Don't worry, we'll definitely avenge Laolu and Laolu. Even if we have to sacrifice all of our Misty School's resources, we'll kill our way to the Righteous Alliance's peak. Good. Lu Qingyang immediately stood up. He ignored the blood on his hands and asked, When are we leaving? Openg smiled bitterly. Laolu, don't worry. Even if we don't kill our way to the Righteous Alliance's peak, they'll immediately send us to our door. Is that so? Big Boss Hu and Old Fifth Lu asked in unison. However, while Lu Qingyang was pleasantly surprised, Hu Yuni was somewhat astonished. What's going on here? Laolu, tell us in detail. Big Boss Hu frowned and asked. After Openg explained the matter in detail, Big Boss Hu frowned even more and said, If that's the case, our Misty School is now facing the most serious situation. If anything goes wrong, we'll be in danger of being exterminated. However, why would the Righteous Alliance join hands with the Dalan Temple? Openg smiled bitterly. I'm just guessing. I don't have any real evidence. Maybe that Baldy is just a Baldy? Our Misty School can't afford to offend either of these two sections. Just one of them is enough for us to deal with, let alone two sections. I can't find any reason for the two sects to join hands against our Misty School. Could it be that they're shifting the blame to others? What Big Brother said makes sense. There's another possibility, which is the Tenryus sect. Hearing this, Hu Yuni gasped and said, The Tenryus sect is a colossus. It's an existence that can contend with the entire Righteous Alliance. When did we get into such trouble? Openg explained. Big Brother, there's only one possibility. If it's the Tenryus sect, they wouldn't be so troublesome. They could just directly attack us. This method isn't their style. But if it's not them, then it's the Righteous Alliance. The grand heaven-earth hand isn't something that ordinary people can imitate. Yes, Big Brother, it's most likely the Righteous Alliance. But they have no reason to do such a heinous thing in Jianghu. Could it be? At this point, the two of them said in unison, It's the secret plane? But we've kept the news about the secret plane very well. Even the hall masters know very little about it. How could they leak it? Alas, Big Brother, we didn't leak it, but we can't guarantee that the Yanming Villa, the Tan family, and the Wan Jianfeng didn't leak it. But it's not very likely. Yanming Jisher is an extremely cautious person. His Yanming Villa is not easy for outsiders to enter. The Tan family is a big family that practices martial arts. It's even harder to sneak in than the Misty School. Wan Qingjiu of the Wan Jianfeng is even more scheming. He even spies on the Five Claw Peak. How could he leak the news? I estimate that there are no more than 5 people on his side who know about the secret plane. Alas, Big Brother, there's no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world. We've been operating the secret plane for 3 or 4 years and have reaped endless benefits from it. In recent years, the development of the Misty School has relied on the medicinal materials in the secret plane. It's hard to guarantee that no one will find out. Moreover, we've also obtained the light-belonging pill from the secret plane. Such a heaven-defying thing will definitely shorten one's life if we have it. Misfortune is a blessing in disguise. The ancients didn't deceive us. 3. You're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.